Chapter 121. Higashio Motetsu could not help but want to laugh when he saw the person in front of him acting like a little kitten with her hair standing on end. But in the end, he suppressed his laughter and said in a teasing tone, "How do you know that I'm looking at you if you don't look at me?" Chu Qingyan told herself that she had to bear with it, she had to bear with it. When faced with this kind of unreasonable person, the more you pay attention to him, the higher he will jump. Only when you ignore him will he stop. "Little girl, what do you like?" After a moment of silence, Higashio Motetsu spoke leisurely. "Why are you asking this?" Chu Qingyan looked at him suspiciously. Higashio Motetsu crossed his arms behind his back and leaned against the tree. He gave her a devilish smile. "Since we are friends, I have to give you a greeting gift. This young master can still afford it. TSK, TSK, TSK. He obviously sounded like a nouveau riche. Also, when did she agree to be his friend? Don't be too confident. As if he felt Chu Qingyan's resistance, Higashio Motetsu looked at her with a smile. If you feel that you are too lowly to be this young master's friend, that's fine too. This young master has no need to hide things from a stranger who is not my friend. When this young master is bored, I will go to the Fu residence. After all, the young master was set up by someone and this young master can take the opportunity to befriend him. For example, who is the culprit? You know, the Fu family." Chu Qingyan's eyes widened and she looked at him with a guarded expression. She had almost forgotten that this person had witnessed the entire process of them punishing Fu Onlai. If this person really knew the Fu family, it would be very disadvantageous for them. Higashio Motetsu tried to scare her. "I didn't know them at first, but if you provide me with strong evidence that the Fu family's young master was set up, then I know them." Chu Qingyan's face was filled with anger. "Fu Onlai has done all kinds of evil. If we had not intervened, another innocent girl would have been hurt. How can you be so unreasonable? Or perhaps, you're just like them, jackals of the same tribe." Higashio Motetsu put away the frivolous smile on his face and approached her. His tone was both serious and playful. "This young master has never said that he is a good person. Moreover, this is the way of the world. The weak are prey to the strong. It is not something that your bodhisattva heart can change." Chu Qingyan was slightly stunned. The peerless face that was so close to her, and the thin lips that were as bright as the morning dew, had cut open a bloody truth for her. Seeing that the little girl was still in shock, Higashio Motetsu withdrew his body and touched his nose. He was a little puzzled. Could it be that the little girl was frightened by him? "All right, I'm just joking with you. This young master is not so bored as to reveal secrets. Don't worry." Higashio Motetsu shrugged. Chu Qingyan immediately relaxed her body and looked at the person in front of her for the first time. He had an appearance that men would be jealous of and women would be envious of. He had a frivolous personality, as if he did not care about anything. However, when he spoke, it was 30% sarcastic and 70% joking. She did not know which of his words was true. However, after meeting him a few times, it seemed that he did not hurt her. Forget it, it was better to have one more friend than one more enemy. "All right, it is fate that we met. We are friends." Faced with Chu Qingyan's compromise, Higashio Motetsu smiled leisurely. Sincerity. Chu Qingyan had no choice but to introduce herself. "My name is Yen Chu. I am 10 years old this year. My family background is ordinary and not worth mentioning." Higashio Motetsu smiled. Yen Chu is a good name. Chu Qingyan revealed an unnatural smile. Of course she could not reveal her true identity to him, but seeing him smile like a fox, it was as if he had seen through her words. Under the starry night, the two of them aimlessly chatted for a bit. After chatting for a bit, Chu Qingyan found that although this person had such an enchanting appearance, he had his own ideas about things. However, it had to be said that these ideas all sounded very reasonable. Chu Qingyan slowly changed her opinion of him and did not reject him as much. Perhaps this person was not a playboy after all. Looking at the sky, it was already very late. Chu Qingyan thought of Hualing who she had abandoned and her heart immediately cried out in alarm. So Chu Qingyan used her hands to support herself on a tree branch and then used the force to fly down. Where are you going? Higashio Motetsu propped up his chin as he looked down from the tree. I have to go home, otherwise my family will be worried. Chu Qingyan was a little impatient. Do you need me to escort you back? He asked. Chu Qingyan quickly waved her hand, no need. If he sent her back, wouldn't her identity be exposed? Higashio Motetsu shrugged his shoulders. Before leaving, Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes. She wanted to annoy him a bit, so she turned around and waved her hand at him, hello big brother, goodbye big brother. This time Higashio Motetsu did not follow her. He calmly sat on the tree and looked in the direction she left in. He gave a low laugh, you blame big brother. Then don't blame him for not telling her about the 2 bright lipstick marks on her face. Looking up at the starry night, Higashio Motetsu pondered. Actually, he could feel that this little girl was still on guard against him, not even telling him her real name. Yen Chu. She could even think of this name. Forget it, there would be plenty of time in the future. Chu Qingyan quickly passed through the streets, increasing her speed as she flew towards One Night Drunk. She didn't know if Hualing would be waiting for her there if he couldn't find her. She gently opened the window of the private room. There was a light inside, but it was completely silent. She carefully opened the window and was about to climb in, but she happened to see Hualing standing in the middle. Her heart filled with joy. Hualing, I knew it. You weren't waiting for me here. The happy Chu Qingyan did not notice Hualing's tearless expression at all. When she jumped down from the window, a cold as ice voice suddenly sounded out. You know you're back. The moment she landed on the ground, her legs suddenly gave way. Her body stiffened and she slowly raised her head. Her voice trembled as she greeted the person sitting on the chair. Big ice cube, why are you here? Are you here to pick me up? Xiao Su was currently wearing a black brocade robe with a silver mask on his face. His eyes were coldly looking at the person in front of him. When she raised her head, his eyes fell onto the 2 fiery red lipstick marks on her cheeks and his eyes sunk. Chu Qingyan felt that although the temperature in the room was cold, it wasn't enough to make people tremble. Why did the temperature suddenly drop when she turned around? It was so cold that it was terrifying. Hualing looked at the little princess who did not know anything and covered his face with his hands. My little ancestor, you should at least wipe your face when you come back. Without any warning, Xiao Su stood up. His entire body was solemn as he ignored the person inside. He put on his hat and left. Chu Qingyan was stunned in place as she looked at Hualing in a daze. Hualing had a crying face as he handed a mirror to her. Little ancestor, don't look at this subordinate. You should pray for your own fortune. No, he also wanted to pray for his own fortune. Chu Qingyan took the mirror in confusion and looked at it. She instantly threw down the mirror and flew out. Big ice cube, listen to my explanation. Chapter 122. Without a doubt, when she went back that night, the big ice cube ignored her. He didn't even give her a chance to explain herself. She was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. The next day, after Chu Qingyan finished her run with sandbags tied to her feet, she sat on the steps of the courtyard with a bitter expression. Turan was leaning against a tree trunk on the side and Hualing was sitting in a strange position. After today's training, Chu Qingyan called Turan over and had Xining call out Hualing who was lying in the room. Earth Spirit was originally impatient, but he still stayed. Fire Spirit also arrived with Wailing Ghost and Howling Wolf. However, when the 3 of them were gathered, they realized that the young Princess Consort was in a daze. They did not know why the young Princess Consort had called them over, so the 2 of them could only chat to pass the time. Turin, didn't Ethereal come back? Help me get a bottle of golden creation medicine from him. When he came back last night, he didn't need his master's orders and went to the torture room to receive his punishment. It just so happened that his rival was on duty in the torture room. When he saw him, his eyes lit up and he used all his strength to beat him up. Even if he was an iron wall, he wouldn't be able to take it. Turin looked at him. Serves you right. He already warned him, but who told him to be so stubborn? Now that he was suffering, it was his own fault. Hualing glared back at him. It wasn't like he was the only one who was punished. Didn't you also get punished? Gu Yi was even beaten by Lord. Gu Rong and Gu Yi were both sent out by Lord and they couldn't even be seen recently. At this time, Chu Qingyan, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly spoke. I called you here today because I want to have a small meeting with you. I have a question I want to discuss with you. Normally, if you make His Highness angry, how do you make him happy? Turin and Hualing were stunned when they heard this. They looked at each other. Was there ever a time when their master was happy? Hualing shook his head and replied, as a member of the fierce cavalry, if I make a mistake, I will go to the punishment room to receive my punishment. Although Turin didn't want to answer this question, he still moved his lips when he saw Chu Qingyan's sad look. We never need to make you happy because we exist to protect you and share your burden. Could it be that none of you have seen His Highness smile before? Chu Qingyan was very surprised. 10 years ago. Ever since the fire, the master had not spoken for 10 days and 10 nights. Later, the mask covered his face and he became increasingly cold, not allowing anyone to get close to him. The master whose smile made even Bai Shui feel ashamed, the master who was full of vigor and hope for everything, seemed to have been burned to ashes in that big fire. 10 years ago. Chu Qingyan was surprised, but when she heard the earth spirit's sentimental tone, she couldn't help but fall silent. It was 10 years ago again. Ever since she came to the capital city and approached the giant ice cube, the words 10 years ago seemed to be a curse that was everywhere. It made her feel suffocated. What happened to the fire that was rumored to have happened 10 years ago? Why did it make a heaven's favored son become so silent and emotionless? Hualing and Turin were both silent. 10 years ago, that was the unspeakable death of the entire King of England palace and the entire fierce cavalry. Suddenly. I don't care what it was like 10 years ago and I don't care if you made any mistakes to make His Highness happy. I did something wrong and made His Highness unhappy, so I will make up for it. I will use my greatest sincerity to apologize. Chu Qingyan stood up and made a solemn vow. They were them and she was her. She had let down the big ice cube's expectations, so she would pick up the big ice cube's expectations for her. As long as she persevered, she did not believe that she could not melt this big ice cube. Moreover, His Highness' life should be colorful. His life should be filled with laughter and anger and should not be like a pool of stagnant water. So, I will use my greatest strength to let His Highness have the emotions that a normal person should have. She did not know if it was because she was affected by Turin and Hualing's emotions, but she suddenly released a kind of strength. It was not just because of her own mistakes, there was a sour stream that slowly flowed in her heart, calling out to her. She did not want the big ice cube to continue living like this, living without emotions. She felt that the big ice cube should live a better life. Turin and Hualing never thought that Chu Qingyan would suddenly have this kind of thought. They wanted to laugh at her for overestimating herself and trying to use her own method to change their master, but without knowing why, they could not say those words. Although her body was petite, when she stepped on the stairs, it was enough for people to look up to her. Turin and Hualing were silent as they silently watched the little figure jump away. She's just a little brat, why do you two have such admiring and ashamed expressions? A white figure walked out from behind the locust tree and spoke in a disapproving tone. You don't understand. That's because you haven't been in the king's palace recently. The matter between Lord and the little princess, Chi. Hualing glared at a certain person in white clothes and spoke in a displeased voice. The white figure, ethereal. Little princess. I haven't been back for a while and you're already calling me so respectfully. Chi, 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 ethereal shook her head inside. Hualing was instantly filled with anger. Ethereal, you bastard, I hate your strange tone the most. If you have the guts, fight me. Ethereal laughed, only martial artists can use force to solve problems. I won't bicker with you. Hualing was angry, you don't have the guts, coward. Turan collected his emotions and glanced at Ethereal, didn't you come back a long time ago? Why did you only appear today? Ethereal ignored Hualing's clamor and said with a lazy expression, I rushed back for a few days and asked for leave from Lord. I slept for a few days and only woke up today. That's right, do you know why Lord called me back this time? If my guess isn't wrong, it should be related to Old Master Chu's illness. Turan slowly said. With Old Master Chu's personality, chi, you're finished. Hualing gloated. Ethereal didn't care at all, you're exaggerating too much. Isn't she just a weak person? Look at how scared you are. Turan and Hualing didn't want to argue with her. When the time came, they would see the result. Father Chu, who was squatting on the side and pestering Hualing to carve a beggar's chicken with wood, sneezed. Was someone thinking about him just now? Chu Qingyan ran to the study as usual, but she was told that Lord didn't want anyone to disturb him. After being rejected, Chu Qingyan didn't give up. After thinking for an hour, she returned to her room and laid out a piece of paper. She picked up a brush and started writing on it. After more than 2 hours, she finally put down the brush. Then she pinched her sore wrist and picked up the pile of paper with a sly smile. Big ice cube, just wait for me to conquer you. Chapter 123. On the densely packed paper, there were a few big words written on it. Coaxing the big ice cube to fight. First move, make your presence known. Chu Qingyan changed out of her training clothes and estimated the time. She knew that the big ice cube was about to come out of the study, so she ran to the door of the study to wait for him. Gu Rong, who had been sent out a while ago, had already returned. She was still the big ice cube's bodyguard and was standing at the door. Little Princess Consort, Lord has already ordered that no one is allowed to enter. You should go back. Gu Rong reminded her with a smile. Chu Qingyan waved her hand and said, it's fine. I won't go in, I'll just wait outside. Gu Rong didn't know what she wanted to do, but she still let her go. After all, Lord didn't say that the little princess consort wasn't allowed to stand at the door. At this time, the door to the study was opened from the inside and Xiao Su walked out in a black robe. When he saw Chu Qingyan standing outside, he walked past her without looking at her. Chu Qingyan immediately followed with her hands behind her back and a smile on her face as she walked beside him. Xiao Su didn't know why she was acting so strangely. He knitted his brows and walked forward by himself. Second move, asking about one's well-being is indispensable. Every morning, the big ice cube would go to practice martial arts in the morning. Chu Qingyan asked Hualing for the place where the big ice cube practiced martial arts. She would run there early in the morning and wait for him to finish practicing before immediately following him. Big ice cube, are you hungry? Do you want to eat some of the snacks I had Huang Yi prepare for you? Big ice cube, are you thirsty? Do you want me to make tea for you? Big ice cube, are you tired? Do you want me to massage your shoulders for you? Xiao Su didn't understand why she had become so attentive recently. He knitted his brows. When it came to things he couldn't understand, he would always refuse. But it was hard on Hualing. He hadn't recovered from the beatings yet and was always dragged around by the little princess consort. He said that he was her assistant, but he was just a laborer. Hualing looked at the food box in one hand and the tea set in the other. His head drooped as he cried. Thus, this kind of thing kept repeating. Every day, Chu Qingyan would appear in his line of sight. Whether it was waking up in the morning, eating, or leisure time, there would always be her figure swaying in front of his eyes. Even when she used to be afraid of waking up early to have breakfast with him, she could now see him at the dining table, and she even had to help him put on his official robes. Although he didn't have the habit of letting others help him dress, since she had asked, he didn't have any thoughts of refusing, so he let her be. But what made him not know whether to laugh or cry was that the way she dressed was simply difficult to agree with. Every time he saw her tossing around his official robes, he had a strong urge to slap her away. But in the end, he was defeated by her serious and focused look. It seemed that her love was already in his life, pervasive and omnipresent. However, he didn't reject it. On this day, Xiaosu walked out of the study and didn't see the figure of the person waiting for him. He knitted his brows and then walked into the hall. On the way, no one suddenly jumped out to scare him. He narrowed his eyes and then sat down on a chair in the hall, but no one asked him if he was thirsty or if he wanted to drink tea. Xiaosu suddenly had an indescribable feeling. It was as if the normally lively palace had suddenly quieted down. The palace that had never felt so empty seemed to be so big that it made people feel uncomfortable. He wondered if it was because his ears, which were normally disturbed, had suddenly become quiet, so he wasn't used to it. The person who was always chattering by his ear, he didn't know where she had run off to play. He suddenly felt a bit uncomfortable. The person who came to disturb him every day suddenly didn't come. He really wasn't used to it. In the end, when Huang Yi delivered tea, Xiaosu opened his mouth to ask, "Where is Qingyan?" Huang Yi replied with a smile, "The young princess consort went into the kitchen early in the morning and hasn't come out yet." The kitchen? Xiaosu was a bit puzzled. Huang Yi was also puzzled as she replied, "This servant doesn't know either because the young princess consort doesn't allow us servants to come close." Ben Wang knows. "You can leave," Xiaosu said. Huoling, who had recovered in the past few days, had received the young princess consort's guidance and appeared by his master's side every day to make his presence known and reduce the displeasure his master felt from his previous mistakes. Originally, Huoling didn't think highly of the young princess consort's methods, but seeing how persistent she was, he didn't want to pour cold water on her and would occasionally help her. Now that he saw that his master hadn't seen the young princess consort for an hour, he was already asking about her. Huoling couldn't help being surprised. Could it be that the young princess consort had already succeeded in her battle? After a while, a wave of familiar footsteps sounded. Huoling unconsciously looked at his master. Although his master's posture hadn't changed, he could clearly feel the temperature around him rise. "Big Ice Cube, I haven't seen you in a while. Did you miss me?" When Chu Qingyan walked into the hall, she said with a smile. Xiaosu had always refused to answer her crazy questions, otherwise, she would never stop nagging. However, when his gaze fell on her face, the corners of his eyes twitched slightly. The grayish-brown powder was all over her face, making her look like a little tabby cat. She was already used to the Big Ice Cube's shielding system. Chu Qingyan had been through hundreds of battles and had an impenetrable body, so she wasn't afraid of his cold air. The sharp-eyed Huoling saw Xining following behind her with a tray in her hands. "Young princess consort, what did you bring?" Because it was covered by a silver pot, he couldn't see what was inside. Chu Qingyan gave a mysterious smile. The third move in the battle of coaxing the Big Ice Cube, grab his stomach. Chu Qingyan waved her hand and Xining opened the lid, revealing a yellow pastry that was covered in green leaves. It was small and cute, making people drool. This was the pastry she had made in the kitchen all morning. When she was in the modern world, what she loved the most was studying food. But when she came here, Huang Yi's cooking skills were good, but because of her identity, she had never cooked before. Today, for the Big Ice Cube, she rolled up her sleeves and began to struggle with the unfamiliar wood stove and large pots. After all, modern and ancient cooking utensils were different. She messed around for a while before she made the pastry. Just thinking about it made her cry. Dang, 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 golden millet pastry, Big Ice Cube, quick, 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 have a taste. Otherwise, it won't taste good when it gets cold. She pushed the plate in front of him and enthusiastically recommended. Xiao Su looked at the pastry. This king doesn't like sweets. This sentence pushed Chu Qingyan to the bottom of the valley. It was like a fuse. Once it was lit, it began to spread. She had done so much in the past few days, but she had never received a response from the big ice cube. It was like she was acting in a one-man show, but no one appreciated it. Her little bit of confidence finally disappeared at this time. Hearing her lord's words, Xining was still young, so she couldn't help fighting for her master. Hualing saw this and was scared, immediately pulling her out. There were only 2 people left in the hall. Chu Qingyan lowered her head, wondering if she should also go out. She was like air here and he didn't care about her. When she was about to turn and leave, a hand suddenly reached out and gently pulled her in. Chapter 124. His cold fingertips and his palm were indeed slightly warm. Chu Qingyan watched in disbelief as those slender and strong fingers led her towards him. Big ice cube. She looked up and was a bit confused. Xiao Su pulled her hand and looked at it in his palm. Her fingertips were covered in fine scratches and some of them were even red. His heart tightened. How did you get hurt? Chu Qingyan was embarrassed and wanted to take her hand back, but with it being held by him, she couldn't move. She could only give an embarrassed smile. It's a bit stupid, I got it when I was tending the fire. Xiao Su looked at the so-called golden mantu and suddenly felt that it was very pleasing to the eye, but his heart felt a bit numb. Where's the handkerchief? Although Chu Qingyan didn't know what he wanted to do, she still obediently took it out from her sleeve for him. She saw Big Ice Cube take the handkerchief and carefully wipe the ashes off her fingertips. Then he carefully wiped the black powder off her face. Chu Qingyan stood in the same spot and looked at him in a daze. She didn't even know where he had pulled out the medicine from. She looked down as he carefully applied the medicine for her. A phrase suddenly flashed in her mind. A serious man was the most charming. She couldn't agree with this phrase at this time. Although Big Ice Cube was wearing a mask and she didn't know what he looked like, he was willing to lower his head to apply the medicine for her. In her heart, this was already better than those people who relied on their appearance to live. Why are you suddenly so good to this king recently? Xiao Su, who was carefully applying the medicine, suddenly asked. Chu Qingyan was stunned and then she said with a laugh, Big Ice Cube, I've always been good to you. Speak human language. Xiao Su looked at her and then continued applying the medicine. Chu Qingyan gave a light cough. She knew that she couldn't fool him, but she never thought that he would ask. Last time in one night drunk, the lipstick mark on my face was accidentally left by those girls. Don't be angry, I didn't learn bad things. Really, I swear. Chu Qingyan raised her other hand to guarantee. Oh. Oh. What kind of response was this? She was waiting for him to scold her, but there was only one oh. Why oh? Why? Are you still angry? Chu Qingyan could only think of this answer. Seeing that the wound had been treated, Xiao Su withdrew his hand and casually replied, no. Chu Qingyan didn't understand. That was strange. Why did she feel that the Big Ice Cube was acting strangely and didn't want to see her? Was it her imagination? Xiao Su looked at the puzzled Chu Qingyan and his heart sunk slightly. Could it be that he could not tell her that he had waited for her for a long time in the Fu, but she did not come back? He could not help but ask his subordinates, and went to drink all night to look for her, but he did not want to see her having so much fun that she forgot about home. He suddenly felt that without him, she could still live very well. If he was not there, she probably would not think of him. At that time, he was shocked by his own thoughts and did not understand why he would have such thoughts, so he turned and left. When he returned to the Fu, in order to sort out these feelings, he locked himself in the study and did not want to see her. Perhaps if he did not see her, he would be able to find the answer, but he did not find anything. And he did not know what was wrong with this little girl. She kept appearing in front of him every day, and before he found the answer, he did not want to pay attention to her. But in the end, she repeatedly went against his original intentions. Xiao Su stared at her. Because of this stage of training, her height that did not reach his chest had already grown. Her thin and weak little body gradually had the characteristics of a young girl. Her bright and beautiful face had an elegant charm. The young girl in front of him was not as thin and small as she was when he first met her, but the happiness in her eyes had not dissipated. In his eyes, there was no difference between women because they all looked the same. 2 ears, a pair of eyes, a nose, and a mouth. No matter if others said that they were as beautiful as a fairy or as beautiful as a country, he did not feel anything because he had never come into contact with women and did not need to come into contact with them. But now, because he was raising a child, he slowly began to see her outline. He began to care about her happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy, as well as her food and clothing. He suddenly felt that it was very troublesome to raise a child, but he seemed to enjoy it. Now that he saw her anxious and afraid that he would be angry, the inexplicable feelings that he had when he was drunk that night immediately disappeared. All the doubts and puzzlement that he had finally found a solution. Since she was worried that she would still be fine without him, then he would become the most important existence by her side. He could not be without her. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt the big ice cubes gaze on her body. From the initial slight coldness to the scorching heat, he did not hide his overbearing gaze. She vaguely felt that she had seen wrongly, but since the big ice cube was concerned about her finger and was willing to apply medicine for her, did that mean that the big ice cube's anger had really subsided? She could not help but approach him and reach out to hug his arm. In fact, she had done so much, other than to let the big ice cube's anger dissipate, there was a more important reason. The big ice cube was the person who treated her the best in this world other than her parents. He also did not ask for anything in return. She knew that he had a high status and did not lack gold, silver, and jewels, but she felt that he was very lonely. She only wanted to use her care to warm him and accompany him. She did not want him to be cold and live in loneliness. Chu Qingyan, who was immersed in her thoughts, suddenly saw an unbelievable scene. The big ice cube actually picked up the pastry she made and put it in his mouth. Don't you not like sweets? Since you made it, then Ben Wang will eat it. It had to be said, it really was sweet to the point of being sickeningly sweet. Xiao Su could not help but frown. Big ice cube, you're so good. Chu Qingyan happily rubbed against his arm, I'll make non-sweet ones for you in the future. Xiao Su suddenly felt that this pastry was not that sickeningly sweet. Huoling, who had just come back from Xining, saw this harmonious scene and immediately turned to walk out the door. He must have been too tired from being tormented by the little princess, so he was hallucinating. So Xining watched as Huoling ran into a pillar as soon as he walked out the door. She complained in her heart, so stupid. Who knows where his eyes went? The two people in the hall continued to talk. Big ice cube, is the golden millet cake good? It's all right. Chu Qingyan happily watched as the big ice cube ate the millet cake bite by bite. Her heart was filled with an indescribable satisfaction. Big ice cube, I don't just know how to make pastries, I also know how to make many dishes. For example, fish, meat, hairy crab, vegetables, etc., but it might not be as good as Huang Yi's. Seeing the person beside him touch her nose and stick out her tongue, Xiao Su curled his lips. Then when he heard the words hairy crab, he suddenly thought of something. This king has something to tell you. Chapter 125. What is it? Chu Qingyan's interest was immediately piqued. In half a month, it will be the Mid-Autumn Festival. Imperial Father wants us to enter the palace to participate in the chrysanthemum viewing banquet. Xiao Su stroked her hair and said in a gentle voice. He knew that she did not like the palace, but it was the annual reunion day, so the members of the imperial family had to attend. Chu Qingyan subconsciously wanted to ask if she could not go, but before the words came out, she stopped herself. She knew that to outsiders, she was already the consort of the King of England, so it would not be right if she did not attend. Moreover, after the day trip to the palace, she had already deeply experienced the big ice cube situation, so she could not be willful and leave a reason for others to criticize the big ice cube. What's good to eat at the chrysanthemum viewing banquet? Hairy crabs. Chrysanthemum wine. Buddha jumps over the wall. Chu Qingyan pretended to be curious as she asked. Xiao Su saw that she did not ask if she was going or not, and his heart suddenly let out a sigh of relief. Actually, he subconsciously wanted her to go. Seeing other people laughing and talking, he also wanted to feel the company of his family. Imperial father and imperial mother were too far away, so the only thing he could grasp was the warmth in his palm. There are all of them. If you don't have any, come back and have Huang Yi make some for you. Chu Qingyan smiled until her eyes turned into crescents. Okay. Xiao Su rarely saw her being so obedient, so his heart softened. We are going to participate in the palace banquet tonight, but we don't have anything to do during the day. You can invite father and mother to celebrate in the Fu. Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up. Really? Xiao Su saw the hope in her eyes and coughed unnaturally. Up to you. Big ice cube, you're too awesome. Chu Qingyan suddenly held his face and gave him a big kiss. Then she danced as she ran away. I'll have someone tell father and mother, they will definitely be very happy. Xiao Su stared blankly at the person who happily flew away like a butterfly. Then he raised his hand and covered his face that was not covered by the mask that was stained with saliva. His lips suddenly curled into a smile. So be it, this is good too. He had been alone for too long and wanted to find someone to accompany him. In the blink of an eye, the 15th of August arrived. The usually deserted prince's mansion also became lively with the arrival of the festival. Everywhere was brimming with jubilation. Every servant had a smile on their face. Planting in spring and harvesting in autumn, the fruits were abundant. It was another year's harvest season and another day of reunion. Because Xiao Su was the first prince of the Sichuan kingdom, people came to deliver gifts early in the morning. White Tiger and his servants were extremely busy. In the study, Huling and Turin stood respectfully in front of the desk. Master, there are more people giving gifts today than in previous years. Huling had just passed by the storeroom when he saw many people moving gifts. He sighed emotionally. Turin sneered. If it weren't for the fact that the imperial court had begun to discuss the crown prince, these people wouldn't be so attentive. However, I reckon that they didn't just send gifts to our imperial residence. These people's brains are very flexible. They flatter everyone and don't offend anyone. Humph. Huling agreed. The two of them had been talking for so long, but their master didn't say anything. They couldn't help looking up at the person standing in front of the window. At this time, a tender but pleasant young girl's voice sounded. Father, raise it higher, higher. Right, to the left. Turin and Huling followed their lord's gaze and saw the little princess directing their father to hang up the lanterns. The fiery red lanterns contrasted with their faces, making them look very festive. Turin and Huling couldn't help looking at each other. Turin finally spoke. Master, the little princess has been working hard recently. Her qigong has improved and her martial arts moves have also improved. Especially a few days ago, in order to accompany his master to eat breakfast and then send him to morning court, the little princess woke up very early to complete her training. Then, as long as his master wasn't around, she would seize the opportunity to train. She was very hardworking. In order to take care of both sides, she didn't waste any time to learn martial arts. Her tenacity made him have a whole new level of respect for her. When Xiao Su heard this, he looked at him with ridicule. When did you also change? Turin was slightly dazed. His master was laughing at him for starting to speak up for the little princess. The little princess's hard work is obvious to all of us. This subordinate isn't the kind of person who can't distinguish right from wrong. After saying this, he saw Huo Ling winking at him. Turan rolled his eyes at him. When Xiao Su heard this, he turned to look at the young girl who couldn't hide her smile under the eaves. It was as if a ray of sunlight had penetrated his eyes and gradually dyed them with warmth. Blockhead, I found a gemstone. Quickly help me identify it. In the afternoon, Father Chu caught Mu Ling walking past and happily pulled him to a stop. Mu Ling facepalmed. He had already explained many times that his name was Mu Ling, not Blockhead. He originally wanted to ignore him, but when he saw the red gemstone in his hand, he suddenly had the urge to bang his head against the wall. First Master, did you go to the main hall? Yes. Then did you dig out this gemstone from the tea table next to the main seat? How did you know? You're even better than the divine mathematician. Mu Ling continued to facepalm because that tea table was made by him a few days ago. That gemstone was also placed there by him. When Chu Qingyan saw Mu Ling deflated, she could only lament his misfortune. This father of hers wasn't something that ordinary people could bear. At this time, she turned her head and saw the person standing in the long corridor. She immediately dashed over. Big ice cube, look. Father and I decorated this. Chu Qingyan stood in front of him, only letting him see. Xiao Su followed her finger and looked at the surrounding lanterns, flower pots, and window flowers. He couldn't help but reach out to pat her head. You've worked hard. This was the first time that someone treated it as their home and put in so much effort to decorate it. Chu Qingyan continued, Mother said that she'll cook for us today. Just thinking about it makes me drool. Xiao Su's gaze softened. Okay. Before the reunion dinner started, Ethereal was called into the study by Xiao Su. Master, did you call this subordinate to ask about old Master Chu's illness? Ethereal asked. Yes. Can it be treated? Xiao Su asked directly. Ethereal shook his head awkwardly. It wasn't because he was biased against Father Chu and didn't want to treat him, but because he wasn't good at it. This subordinate studies poison and detoxification. This subordinate doesn't know much about diseases related to the brain. This subordinate has tried to interact with old Master Chu these few days, but regrettably, this subordinate hasn't been able to find the illness that affects his intelligence. This subordinate's skills are not good enough. Ethereal said, ashamed. Xiao Su comforted him. This isn't your problem. Since you said so, I'm afraid you'll have to look for your master, Divine Dr. Luo. Ethereal shook his head. My master hasn't been found for many years. Previously, Lord had already asked Water Spirit to keep an eye on him, but unfortunately, she hasn't found him yet. So this subordinate thinks that there's not much hope to find my master. His master liked to play by himself and didn't want to be burdened by fame, so he concealed his identity. If he didn't want to appear, there wouldn't be many people in the world who could find him. Xiao Su frowned. From the looks of it, Father Chu's illness was very difficult to treat. If Qing Yan knew about it, she would be worried. Ethereal hesitated whether he should tell her about that person, but he thought that she wouldn't want to see him. Seeing that his master was a little depressed, Ethereal still said, actually, other than my master, there's another person who might be able to treat old Master Chu. Chapter 126. Because they had to attend the palace banquet tonight, the reunion dinner was held in the evening. Because it was already autumn, it was not as hot as summer, so the location was set in an empty courtyard. Everyone took their seats. Almost all of them were seated at the table. Huang Yi brought the servants to serve the dishes and the table was filled with all kinds of fresh dishes. Chu Qingyan sat next to Xiao Su, followed by Mother Chu and Father Chu. On one side of Xiao Su was Chu Qingyan, followed by the four spirits of wood, fire, earth, and space, as well as Steward Bai. The rainbow-colored maidservants sat together with the other maidservants and the manservants sat around their own tables. Because it was a reunion dinner, there was no distinction between master and servant. Everyone was happy. In the past, There were also reunion banquets in the residence, but they were mostly attended by the servants. Xiao Su basically didn't appear. He was originally a cold person. With him around, the servants simply couldn't let go of their hands and feet. Rather than this, it was better to let them play by themselves. This time, Chu Qingyan strongly requested for him to be present, so he did not refuse. Moreover, with the clown Father Chu and the talent Huo Ling who was good at livening up the atmosphere, the entire reunion dinner was filled with laughter. Xiao Su swirled the wine cup in his hand. It was like through the wine, he could see the warmth of the sunset and the coldness in his eyes had been washed away. Chu Qingyan saw everyone drinking and she could not help reaching out to pour wine, but her hand was slapped away by a hand. Chu Qingyan turned to look at the person who slapped her. I want to drink. No, children can't drink. Xiao Su said in a tone that could not be refused. I'm not a child, I'm already a grown-up. Chu Qingyan felt that sometimes her identity as a 10-year-old was very good. She could use it as a cover for her mistakes, but sometimes she felt that this identity was very awkward. Every time she wanted to do something, it was a kind of restriction. For example, she wanted to taste this fruit wine, but she was not allowed. Xiao Su faintly glanced at her. Wait until you're of marriageable age before saying this to this king. Chu Qingyan angrily put down her wine glass and gobbled down her food. The big ice cubes really spoiled the mood. Father Chu, who was playing the drinking game with Huo Ling, heard this and turned his head. He shouted at his daughter, my son-in-law is right. Kai Kai, you have to be obedient. Chu Qingyan lowered her head even more. Even her father was standing on the ice cube side. How was she going to live her life? Chu Machen's mother shook her head and laughed. She said to her daughter who was busy eating, don't eat so much, or you won't be able to eat when we enter the palace later. Xiao Su replied, it's fine. The palace banquet only has some exquisite and beautiful dishes. It's not enough to fill the gaps between her teeth. It's good that she's eating something now. Otherwise, she won't be able to last until we return home. Chu Machen's mother was surprised that the King of England would reply to her. Originally, she was worried that her daughter would be wronged if she stayed in the prince's estate. After all, the rumors about the King of England outside were not good. But when she saw with her own eyes how he cared for her daughter, she suddenly felt that the rumors outside were not true. People had to see it with their own eyes. Towards this son-in-law who was bestowed by the emperor, Chu Machen's mother had always respectfully distanced herself from him. Now, she didn't know if it was because of the reunion or because she was affected by his words, but Chu Machen's mother felt pity for this child who had not been favored since he was young. Lord, you also have to eat more. Otherwise, the palace banquet will be long and you'll starve. Xiao Su felt Chu Machen's mother's concern and nodded slightly at her. At this time, Chu Machen's father also echoed, son-in-law, I heard that there will be a lot of beautiful chrysanthemums at the chrysanthemum banquet. When you come back, remember to help me secretly bring back a few pots. Xiao Su automatically ignored it. Everything was an illusion. It was going to be night soon. The carriage to enter the palace was already prepared. Chu Qingyan and Xiao Su got up and left first. The rest of the people continued to eat and drink. Sitting in the carriage, Chu Qingyan burped. Then, she lifted the curtain and looked at the gradually setting sun outside the window. She sighed. It had been half a year since she came to ancient times. Time passed quickly and she couldn't grasp it. Big ice block, can you do me a favor? Chu Qingyan turned her head and looked at the person who was resting with his eyes closed. Xiao Su, who rarely saw her so serious, slowly opened his eyes. What is it? Chu Qingyan told him the thing that she had been thinking about for a long time. Many years ago, my father hit his head and lost his mind. I want to ask for your help. Let Ethereal take a look at my father. She had made this request to Ethereal before, but it seemed that he was biased against her and ignored her. Her father's illness had been going on for 10 years. She felt that it couldn't be delayed any longer. I'm afraid that Ethereal can't do anything about your father's illness. He had already discussed this with Ethereal. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan's expression darkened. She had heard that Ethereal's medical skills were amazing. Even the imperial physicians in the palace couldn't compare. She had placed her hopes on him, but now that her hopes were dashed again, she had a headache. Was there anyone in the world who could cure her father's illness? Seeing her gloomy expression, Xiao Su muttered to himself for a moment. Then, he told her what Ethereal had said in the study today. But Ethereal has a junior sister who is good at treating intractable internal diseases. She might be able to cure your father. He was never one to say things that he couldn't guarantee, but when he saw her frown and worry, he couldn't help but want to see her always full of energy. He had wanted to wait until he found Ethereal's junior sister before telling her, but now, he had to wait until then. She would be happy and carefree. Really? That's great. Can Big Ice Block help me find Ethereal's junior sister? It was like riding a roller coaster, going up and down. Chu Qingyan clung onto his sleeve and asked impatiently. Ben Wang has already sent people to find her. I'll tell you when I find her. Xiao Su stroked her long hair as he said faintly. With Big Ice Block's words, she was reassured. Once they reached the palace gates, the two got off the carriage and headed towards the imperial gardens. When they reached the entrance, a palace maid curtsied to Xiao Su and then said that the empress had important matters to discuss with him. Xiao Su thought for a bit and then lowered his head to say to Chu Qingyan in front of him, "You go over first, Ben Wang will be there in a bit." When Chu Qingyan heard that Empress Liang had important matters to discuss with him, she obediently agreed. Xiao Su said a few words to the eunuch leading the way and then turned to leave with the palace maid. However, after taking a few steps, he stopped, turned around, and waved at Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan walked forward in confusion. What is it? Xiao Su slightly leaned over and said to her with a serious expression, "You have to remember your identity. You are the consort of the King of England, which represents this king's identity. If anyone dares to bully you, then bully them back. There's no need to be polite. You don't have to be afraid of any trouble, Ben Wang will deal with it for you." Chu Qingyan's eyes lit up like stars. How domineering was he? This kind of man was the most charming. "As you command." Chu Qingyan put her fingers together and pointed to her temple, making a standard military salute. Seeing the Big Ice Block's departing figure, Chu Qingyan rubbed her hands together. With the Big Ice Block's words, she felt relieved and straightened her back. "Come on, little fairies. I have a backer, so I'm not afraid of you." After shouting in her heart a few times, as if she had triggered a summoning order, a sharp female voice sounded in her ears. "Yo, look who this is." Chapter 127. When Chu Qingyan heard this tone, she knew that this person did not come with good intentions. However, the other party did not mention her name, so there was no need for her to admit that the other party was talking about her. Thus, Chu Qingyan ignored her and followed the eunuch who was leading the way. "The one in front, stop." She did not expect that the other party would ignore her. Just now, her tone was dragged and sharp, but now it was filled with exasperation. "The one in front? Which one was that?" Chu Qingyan expressed that she did not know and continued to walk. Then, footsteps came from behind. Chu Qingyan frowned. That person had passed by her and stood in front of her. "You really have no manners. Don't you know that this lady is calling you?" It was a girl about 12 or 13 years old. She had thick eyebrows and big eyes. She was dressed in pink and had a childish air. However, the look of disdain on her face made Chu Qingyan unable to love her. "Who are you really talking about?" Chu Qingyan raised her eyebrows. "I'm really talking about you." The girl in pink immediately retorted. Chu Qingyan smiled, "It's good that you know that you have no manners. Don't block the way. I want to pass. Before the girl in pink could react, a soft and slightly mocking voice came from behind Chu Qingyan. Sister Xia Mo, this person is saying that you have no manners. Chu Qingyan raised her eyebrows again. It turned out that there was more than one opponent. Linghu Xiamu raised her eyebrows. You have guts. You actually dare to scold this lady. At this time, two girls passed by her and walked to Linghu Xiamu's side. One was dressed in a Rui Moon dress and the other was dressed in an embroidered dress. Both of them were 13 or 14 years old. However, like Linghu Xiamu, they were looking at her with disdain. The two of them quietly sized her up. Except for Linghu Xiamu's gloomy face, Chu Qingyan knew that Linghu Xiamu was probably the one who stood out and was instigated to provoke her. Chu Qingyan looked at Linghu Xiamu lazily. I think it's you who has guts. You dare to block this lady's way. The girl in the Rui Moon dress sneered. Look at your tone. Those who don't know would think that you have some kind of unattainable family background. Chu Qingyan blinked. Could this be the so-called unexpected calamity? She was just walking on the road, and yet someone wanted to bump into her. Sister Su is right. Linghu Xiamu agreed. No matter what kind of family background I have, it doesn't seem to have anything to do with you ladies. That doesn't have anything to do with us. It's just that we can't stand by and watch. You're just a crow. Don't think that just because you've climbed up the first prince, you'll be able to fly to the top. Linghu Xiamu glared at her and said disdainfully. You guys are really too much. Chu Qingyan facepalmed. She had no interest in quarreling with these little girls. Ha, Chu Qingyan, who do you think you are to speak to us like this? The gentle yet slightly mocking voice from before came out of the mouth of the woman in the embroidered dress. Sister Lingqing is right. You lowly crow. Linghu Xiamu put her hands on her waist and said with disdain. What status? Is the status of the King of England's consort enough? Chu Qingyan didn't want to be serious with them. However, these three people were blocking her way and she couldn't leave. The eunuch who led the way didn't seem to dare to offend these people and shrank to the side. She could only fight by herself. Crow. They actually dared to call her a crow. They were really drunk. When Linghu Xiamu, Lu Su and Yi Lingqing heard this, they were even more annoyed. One of them was the second daughter of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights, the other was the eldest daughter of the assistant minister of the Ministry of Appointments, and the other was the eldest daughter of the Grand Preceptor. They could be said to be the capital's socialites. The upper class had their own social circles and were always exclusive, especially those who had no value. They didn't know where this Chu Qingyan came from. She suddenly entered the social circle with a high status. Moreover, they had only heard of her name and never seen her in person. Everyone laughed at her for wanting neither power nor wealth. However, she was lucky enough to become the King of England's consort. That was a position that many people dreamed of. Although His Royal Highness always covered his face with a mask, the indescribable aura he exuded when he stood there was enough to make people fascinated. Besides, his status as a prince and the legend of the god of war. Which of these wasn't the reason why the women in the capital flocked to him? Even if the outside world had rumors that His Royal Highness was a jinx to his wife, people had always been conceited. Those women all thought that if they became the King of England's consort, then their fate as His Royal Highness would be changed. At least, that was what Lu Su, who was standing in front of Chu Qingyan, thought. Lu Su, looked at Chu Qingyan. Although she was only 10 years old, she was about the same height as her. She had a beautiful and charming appearance. In time, she didn't know what she would look like. She felt a burst of jealousy in her heart. Back then, before the imperial edict was issued, her father had the idea of marrying her to His Royal Highness. However, it was a step too late. His Majesty had already bestowed marriage to Chu Qingyan to His Royal Highness. During those few days, she was so angry that she couldn't even eat. So now that she saw Chu Qingyan, she couldn't wait to tear her face to shreds. As for Linghu Xiema and Yi Lingqing, they were looking for trouble with Chu Qingyan not because of Xiao Su, but because of Xiao Ran. The first prince, Xiao Su, was the eldest son and had the most support. Although the second prince was talented, he was dissolute by nature. Most of the ministers in the court had prejudice against him. The third prince was sickly and only accompanied by medicinal soup all day long. It was likely that he was not fated to be the crown prince. As for the fourth prince, he was the most favored by the Sichuan emperor. He was talented and intelligent, so his support was not low. Therefore, although Linghu Xiema and Yi Lingqing were young, they often heard their father discussing the current state of the court at home. Because their family wanted them to become phoenixes, they had been eyeing the position of the fourth consort for a long time. However, not long ago, there was a rumor that the fourth prince often went to the King of England's residence, not to find the King of England, but to play with the future consort of the King of England, Chu Qingyan. Therefore, there were rumors that Chu Qingyan had ulterior motives and wanted to have a foot in both boats. She wanted to use her beauty to seduce the inexperienced fourth prince. Therefore, there was the scene of the three women besieging Chu Qingyan. If Chu Qingyan knew the truth, she would probably spit out a mouthful of blood. It was still fine with the big ice cube, but where did Xiao Ran's rumor come from? It was too fake, all right? At this time, a master and servant walked over from afar. When they saw the scene in front of them, the servant said to the master beside him, "Miss, it seems that the rumor you let this servant spread has worked. Not bad, well done. I want Chu Qingyan to become a rat crossing the street and being shouted at by everyone." A sinister voice spat out from those red lips, carrying a bit of strangeness. This master and servant pair were none other than the granddaughters of Grand Tutor Dji, Yao Yingrua and Lu Yi, whom Chu Qingyan had met once on the street. Chapter 128. Chu Qingyan raised her eyebrows. "What do you want?" "What do we want?" "Stay away from the fourth prince. You're already a married woman. Don't flirt and seduce the fourth prince." Linghu Xiema crossed her arms and said fiercely. "The fourth prince? What did he have to do with Xiao Ran? I didn't expect that a young lady from an official's family would speak like a commoner. I wonder how the elders in the family would feel if they knew that the daughter they raised was like this. Besides, the fourth prince is the fourth prince, and I am me. We're completely unrelated. Please don't slander others." Although she didn't want to make enemies, it didn't mean that she was a pushover. Linghu Xiema was speechless. What she said just now was indeed beneath her dignity. However, if she didn't say that, it would be difficult to vent the anger in her heart. She had once entered the palace to see the fourth prince. She had long been subdued by his elegance and buried it in her heart like a seed that slowly sprouted. Now that she heard that Chu Qingyan was close to him, how could she not be jealous and angry? "Younger sister Xiema, there's no need to talk about principles with this commoner. She won't understand, so don't take it to heart." Lu Su seemed to be comforting Linghu Xiema, but she was actually belittling Chu Qingyan. Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes. She wasn't in the mood to fight with these little girls. The chrysanthemum viewing banquet is about to begin. I'll have to trouble you to move aside. Otherwise, you won't be able to bear the consequences if you miss the time. Chu Qingyan didn't wait for them to react and walked forward. Just as Chu Qingyan brushed past them, Linghu Xiamo and the other two exchanged glances. One of them pretended not to care as she stepped on Chu Qingyan's skirt. Another lifted her leg to trip Chu Qingyan while the last raised her hand to push Chu Qingyan away. The three of them acted in one breath. It was unknown whether it was because they had done this many times or because they were sisters, but in the blink of an eye, a conspiracy was formed. No matter which one of them failed, they would be the next substitute. It could be said that everything was linked together. However, Chu Qingyan, who had been paying attention to their movements, chuckled softly when she saw this. Her body, which had been trained in Qinggong, was extremely agile. With a sway of her body, she had already dodged the foot that was pressing down on her skirt. Then, she stepped on the foot that was tripping her. Finally, she casually raised her hand and waved it towards the hand that was about to push her away. That hand immediately changed its direction and went towards the person beside her. Before Linghu Xima could cry out in pain, her foot was ruthlessly stepped on and Lu Suer had already pounced on her. The two of them lost their footing and fell backwards, crashing into Yi Lingqing, who had not retracted her foot in time. Like dominoes, the three of them tripped over one another and were pushed to the ground. "I-oh." Chu Qingyan turned around as if she had been frightened. "Ah, why are the three young mistresses lying on the ground?" Did he want to experience the feeling of having the sky as his blanket and the earth as his bed? Although it's already night time, it's not time to rest yet. Besides, the location is not right. Chu Qingyan's voice was just right to exclaim in surprise. Her face was full of confusion, as if she was just a bystander. The three of them who had fallen on their backs knew that it was all her doing. Falling down in the imperial palace was such a shameful thing. If news of this spread, they would lose all their face. Linghu Xima flew into a rage out of humiliation. She struggled to get up from the ground and staggered to Chu Qingyan. Raising her hand, she wanted to slap her face. She even shouted, "You despicable person, you actually sneak attacked me when I was unprepared. See if I don't smash your mouth." Halfway through, her raised hand was easily caught by Chu Qingyan. Linghu Xima struggled, but she could not break free. She suddenly panicked. "You slut, let go of me." Chu Qingyan pulled her close and saw the fear in her eyes. She revealed her white teeth eerily and said close to her ear, "You really are stupid. You were instigated to stand out and still think that you're infallible. Who told you that this young lady is on good terms with the fourth prince? Don't be sold by others and still help them count their money." Also, at this point, Chu Qingyan's gaze swept towards Lu Suer and Yi Lingqing, who had just gotten up from the ground. Her eyes suddenly turned cold. This young lady hates people who play tricks the most. If you have the ability, then continue to come at me. This young lady has been feeling bored out of her mind recently. I don't mind playing with you. With that, she exerted force and threw Linghu Xima towards the two. Lu Suer and Yi Lingqing, who had just steadied themselves, were knocked back 2 steps by Linghu Xima. Fortunately, there was a large rock behind them. Otherwise, they would have fallen and become dizzy. Chu Qingyan, don't be so smug. You'll have to move in and out of the capital eventually. The circle is only so big. Be careful of retribution. Lu Suer pointed at her angrily. Chu Qingyan chuckled. If you haven't done anything wrong, you won't be afraid of ghosts knocking on your door in the middle of the night. You guys, on the other hand, pay attention to your door at night. Lu Suer and the other two shuddered, but they did not want to lose their momentum. In the end, Yi Lingqing put on a strong front and said, Chu Qingyan, remember this. We are irreconcilable with you. Go ahead. Chu Qingyan shrugged her shoulders nonchalantly. Humph. The three supported each other and glared at her fiercely before fleeing. They were just 3 children with poor fighting skills. Chu Qingyan did not really care about them. However, after fighting with them, Chu Qingyan discovered a crucial problem. They had food to eat. The youngest was 12, and the oldest was 14 or 15. However, the way they handled things and spoke had clearly exceeded her understanding of children. It seemed that she had overlooked something. Children in ancient times were different from children in modern times. Children in ancient times were already biological children at 15. Therefore, children at 12 or 13 years old were terrifyingly smart. Their knowledge of the ways of the world was no less than that of a modern adult. She had always thought that she had the appearance of a 10-year-old, so she had never dared to show her other side. Her behavior was like that of a child. Now that she looked at it, it was actually wrong. Perhaps in the eyes of outsiders, she was innocent if put nicely. But to put it bluntly, she was simply stupid. She could not go on like this. Otherwise, she would only be bullied by others. No one knew that the inconspicuous incident in a remote corner had become the catalyst for the awakening of Chu Qingyan's inner universe. She had always used her cleverness and innocence to hide her 20-year-old mind. Now, she was no longer willing to live so foolishly. Yao Yinrua, who had witnessed all of this, was surprised by Chu Qingyan's agility and intelligence. At this moment, she saw that her eyes were shining with a dazzling light. Yao Yinrua's heart suddenly skipped a beat. There was an inexplicable fear in her heart. It was as if she could see her future dazzling and proud figure through this scene. Yao Yinrua quietly clenched her fists. No, she would never let Chu Qingyan have the qualifications to stand beside His Royal Highness. She must get rid of her. Chapter 129. Chu Qingyan stood in place for a while. Just as she was about to leave, she heard the familiar ringing of the pagoda bell. She turned around and saw Su Jian dressed in green monk robes. Behind him was a verdant black bamboo, which made him look tall and handsome. "Master, long time no see." Chu Qingyan curtsied to him. Although he had tried to persuade her to enter Buddhism and angered her, he had saved her twice after all. She could not forget his life-saving grace. "Almsgiver Chu, how have you been?" Su Jian walked over step by step with a smile. Although he was dressed in simple monk robes, they were sewn from the most precious Indian silk. With each step, they flowed with a low-key luster, just like his status. He was hidden in the city, but also unapproachable. "Master, are you also going to attend the chrysanthemum banquet?" Chu Qingyan followed him slowly towards the imperial garden. Yes. A few days ago, he had entered the palace to chant scriptures and chant Buddhist scriptures for Sichuan Emperor to drive away distracting thoughts. The Sichuan Emperor had invited him to the palace. Originally, he did not want to participate in these worldly affairs, but when he thought that Chu Qingyan would be there, he agreed. He did not expect to meet her as soon as he entered the palace. "Almsgiver Chu, how have you been?" Su Jian asked with a smile. Chu Qingyan spread her hands. So, not bad. "But master, how about you?" "Chanting scriptures and chanting Buddhist scriptures, meditating. I have new insights every day. It's very fulfilling and meaningful." Su Jian looked at her with a smile. Looking at his clear eyes looking back at her, Chu Qingyan hurriedly raised her hand. Stop. "Master, you're not trying to persuade me to become a monk again, are you? What's wrong with becoming a monk? It's better than wasting your time." Su Jian asked, puzzled. "Master, how can you tell that I'm wasting my time? I've been living a carefree and fulfilling life every day." Chu Qingyan shrugged. "Indeed, your steps are light. It seems that you've learned Qinggong," Su Jian commented. Chu Qingyan was surprised. She didn't expect that she could tell whether someone practiced martial arts just by looking at their eyes. It was simply too amazing. Grandmaster's insight is truly unique. You were able to see through all of this. But then again, you're a senior monk, so why are you participating in the palace banquet of the secular world? Shouldn't you be meditating in a Buddhist temple? Chu Qingyan blinked at him. Su Jian knew that she was doing this on purpose, but it wasn't as if he couldn't answer this question. A monk is born in the world of mortals, and re-enters the world from the world of mortals. As long as one's state of mind is peaceful, it is the same everywhere. Chu Qingyan nodded. She felt that this was not unreasonable. Unfortunately, she did not want to be a family member. "Then, master, do you know how to tell fortunes?" People say that senior monks have heavenly eyes and can see demons and ghosts that ordinary people can't see. They can see through all the strange things in the world. Is that true? Su Jian could not help but laugh when he heard this, and a smile spread across his face. It was not that Chu Qingyan had not seen him smile before, but those smiles were always emotionless. It made people feel as though they were all emotionless. She had once thought that his smile was just for show. Now that she saw his smile, it was as though a snow-white lotus had bloomed at the corner of his mouth. It was so pure, and so fascinating. TSK, TSK, TSK. As expected, people with good looks would be pleasing to the eye no matter what they did. Seeing that Chu Qingyan's gaze was fixed on his face, Su Jian retracted his smile. After thinking for a moment, he explained, I am a disciple of Buddhism. Apart from my Buddhist heart, I am no different from a commoner. I also don't have heavenly powers. However, almsgiver Chu seems to have misunderstood. A Buddhist disciple's mission is to enlighten others, not to tell fortunes. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. She felt that her question had been a little abrupt. Just as she was about to change the topic, she heard Su Jian speak again. However, sometimes we can see things that you can't. For example, your future. My future? Chu Qingyan widened her eyes. Didn't this person just say that he was also a layman? How did he change his tone so quickly? Was he sure that he wasn't a charlatan? That's right. It's precisely because I can see your future that this penniless monk enlightens you to become a monk. If you continue to persist in going about things the wrong way and remain in the mortal world, there will be a great calamity in the future. You will harm yourself and implicate the people around you. Su Jian looked into her eyes and said seriously. However, when Su Jian finished speaking, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but hold her stomach and laugh. Great Master, just now you said that Buddhist disciples aren't fortune-tellers. Why are your words so mystical now? If you set up a stall and say that you tell people's fortunes, it would really make it sound like that. Su Jian saw that she was laughing so hard that he kept a straight face and said, Almsgiver Chu, a monk doesn't lie. Chu Qingyan slowly stopped laughing when she saw that he was still as untouchable as ever. She stood up straight, her eyes still twinkling with laughter, but there was also a hint of wisdom and intelligence in them. Grandmaster, have you ever heard that a fortune that has been divined before is inaccurate? That is because one's fate cannot be divined. Once a fortune is divined, it will be influenced by one's subjective consciousness, and its trajectory will be changed. That is why, as you said earlier, my fate has already been changed. Chu Qingyan raised her head and looked at the slightly surprised Su Jian. Her lips curled into a confident smile. I, Chu Qingyan, have never believed in the heavens, nor did I believe that anyone can control my fate. A person's hand has 3 strings, life, marriage, and career. People say that these 3 strings determine a person's fate, but they're wrong. When we clench our fists, our fate is actually in our own hands. That's why, Great Master, your so-called fates don't count, because my fate is in my own hands, not the heavens. Looking at the young girl in front of him, who was young but had a confidence that ordinary people didn't have, Su Jian felt his heart tremble. He felt that there was something wrong with what she said, but he couldn't find the reason. He could only watch as she waved at him and then walked into the imperial garden. Su Jian slowly turned the prayer beads in his hand, calming the impact of her words. Fate can't be calculated. My fate is in my own hands, not the heavens. Su Jian was a little confused. Then was it wrong for him to take her to Buddhism? Originally, he wanted to change her fate by guiding her into Buddhism. However, she told him that once the fate was calculated, it did not count. Then, did his participation change anything? For the first time, Su Jian was at a loss because he couldn't understand. He took a step forward, but his hands stopped turning the prayer beads. He frowned slightly and closed his eyes in thought. After a moment, he opened his eyes. Tonight, Xiao Su was going to face a tribulation. This tribulation was unavoidable. Su Jian's confused eyes regained their clarity. Looking at the figure that had already disappeared in front of him, Su Jian shook his head slightly. Xiao Su's tribulation was already destined, and her life would also be affected because of it. Thinking back to Chu Qingyan's unbelievably bright eyes, Su Jian had an epiphany. Since he couldn't change it, then he would face it head-on. This was also his tribulation. Chapter 130. How are the preparations going? He asked in a low voice with a hint of grandeur. Master, please rest assured. Everything is ready. As long as the first prince and the fourth prince are involved, nothing will go wrong. The person kneeling respectfully on the ground said proudly. That's good. Success or failure depends on this. The voice sounded again. In the Chaoyang Palace, Empress Liang sat on the main seat and looked at her son in front of her seriously. In the past few days, several old officials have jointly written a letter asking His Majesty to appoint a crown prince as soon as possible. The court is divided into 4 factions, but your biggest competitor is Xiao Ran. If it weren't for your face. Empress Liang looked at the mask on Xiao Su's face and hit her last words. If it weren't for your face being burned, how could Xiao Ran have a foothold in the matter of appointing a crown prince? Therefore, the matter of appointing a crown prince cannot be delayed. Your grandfather will help you contact the officials who support the crown prince. You must perform well in this period of time and strive to share your father's burdens. Show the ability that a crown prince should have. The officials are not blind. They can see who is the best choice for the crown prince. Xiao Su looked at his complacent mother in front of him and his heart was filled with complex emotions. Mother, do you think that I's actions have any meaning? If father had valued I earlier, there wouldn't have been any discussion about the matter of appointing a crown prince. He was the most legitimate candidate for the crown prince of Xixian nation. In the past, he had always been nurtured as the best candidate. However, after the birth of his 4th royal brother and the destruction of that fire, everything was completely different. You have no ambition. As long as nothing has been decided, as long as that position hasn't been taken, you have a chance. Don't give up before you fight for it. The Liang family still needs you to support it. If that position isn't yours, then just wait for your reputation to be ruined and the Liang family to decline. Empress Liang was so angry that her face turned green. Why couldn't she understand why her son didn't care about anything and didn't covet that position at all? Imperial Mother, don't worry. Let nature take its course. He didn't want to argue with his Imperial Mother every time they met, so he could only use these words to brush her off. Empress Liang laughed angrily. Let nature take its course. Don't you know that a lot of things just go along with it? No matter what, you have to fight for me. If you don't get that position, I won't acknowledge you as my son. Xiao Su frowned slightly as an indescribable loneliness flashed across his eyes. I understand. Seeing that he agreed, Empress Liang was slightly relieved. It's about time. It's time to attend the palace banquet. Yes. Xiao Su took a step back and let his imperial mother go first before he followed behind her. His heart was empty and lonely. He didn't know if the little fellow could handle it by herself. Just now, he had already instructed one of his subordinates to take good care of her. The imperial garden was surrounded by palace lanterns. It was as bright as day, driving away the darkness and bathing everyone in the colorful light. Red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, blue, and purple colors intertwined and overlapped with each other, adding to the colorful atmosphere of the banquet. When Xiao Su walked into the imperial garden, he saw Chu Qingyan smiling brightly under the lights. His heart, which had always been worried about her, was finally put down at ease. Seeing Big Ice Cube, Chu Qingyan immediately waved at him secretly. When Big Ice Cube sat down beside her, Chu Qingyan couldn't wait to say to him, I met a sister. She's very nice. When she saw me coming, she brought me to a seat and chatted with me. She told me a lot of things. Look, she's over there. Chu Qingyan pointed at the long table at the back. Xiao Su looked in the direction she was pointing at. It was the womenfolk of his subordinate. The official sitting beside the womenfolk hurriedly bowed to him. Xiao Su nodded to him. Xiao Su didn't point out that the person was his official's wife. He had received his orders to look after her. He said, "Not bad. You can make friends as soon as you arrive." Chu Qingyan held her face and giggled. "Who told me to have a face that everyone loves?" Xiao Su laughed and shook his head. Finally, he asked, "Did anyone make things difficult for you on the way here?" "No, I didn't cause any trouble either," Chu Qingyan said resolutely. She did not intend to tell Big Ice Cube about what they had encountered on the way here. There was no need to involve Big Ice Cube in a battle between girls. What's more, she did not take those people seriously. Their battle prowess was too weak, and they were not worthy of her attention. Xiao Su nodded when he heard this. At this moment, Sichuan Emperor's imperial carriage arrived. Consort Yu was standing on Sichuan Emperor's left, and the fourth prince, Xiao Ran, was supporting him on his right. They looked like a happy family of three. Everyone present was smart. When they saw this scene and then looked at Empress Liang, who was sitting on the main seat, they had an idea. Chu Qingyan stared at the three people, then looked back at Big Ice Cube. She said with a sweet smile, "Big Ice Cube, are there a lot of chrysanthemums at today's chrysanthemum appreciation banquet?" Yes, the chrysanthemums this time were specially cultivated by the Imperial Household Department. Some were also collected from the common folk. It will definitely be an eye-opener for you later. Xiao Su had a strange feeling that this little girl in front of him was only asking this question to divert his attention. If only I had a camera. Then, I would be able to take a picture, Chu Qingyan mumbled. Camera? Xiao Su was confused by this strange word. She didn't expect that she would let it slip. Chu Qingyan immediately said, "It means to draw a picture. It means to draw a chrysanthemum and keep it forever." Xiao Su fell into deep thought when he heard this. At this moment, everyone at the banquet had already taken their seats. Chu Qingyan glanced over and saw many things that stood out. For example, there were many handsome men with different appearances. The untainted and transcendent Buddhist monk Su Jian. Xiao Yao, the carefree and unrestrained Prince Xiao Yao. The handsome and elegant Prince Xiao Ran was like the bright moon. The sickly Prince Xiao Ho, who had a scholarly air and an elegant appearance. And the handsome man beside her who exuded an air of abstinence and yet had a cold temperament. It was no wonder that there were so many people at the banquet tonight, and most of them were women. Thinking of the three women she met today, it seemed that these people weren't just here to admire the chrysanthemums. Their real goal was the little fresh meat at the banquet. Chu Qingyan clicked her tongue. If these people were in the modern world, they would probably cause screams from love-struck fans. However, the only one she didn't recognize was the sickly-looking third prince, Xiao Ho. It was said that this person was born with a disease and was accompanied by medicine all year round. Perhaps it was because of his health, he was alone in the palace reading books and gardening. His personality was gentle and kind. It was said that this person wouldn't even hurt an ant. However, would someone who lived in a cruel imperial family really be so kind? She couldn't be blamed for thinking too much. It was just that she had watched too many palace dramas. Chapter 131. Just as Chu Qingyan's gaze landed on Xiao Ho, who was seated not far from her, seemed to have sensed her gaze. He turned his head and gave her a light smile. However, he quickly covered his mouth and nose and coughed lightly. The eunuch beside him immediately bowed and patted his back, but he gently pushed the eunuch away. What a pale, sickly, and beautiful man. Chu Qingyan sighed softly. Sure enough, the heavens were fair. A good family background and good looks would always deprive you of something. As if he had heard Chu Qingyan's sigh, Xiao Su gently patted her head. Don't look around. Focus. Chu Qingyan finally retracted her gaze and listened attentively to the Sichuan emperor's congratulatory speech. Soon, it was time to present the gifts. As the eldest prince, Xiao Su was the first to present the gifts. Xiao Su presented a painting of a pine tree that was extremely difficult to find in the world. The Sichuan emperor loved to admire famous paintings the most. Since the painting of the immortal had passed away a long time ago, his paintings were even harder to find. It was said that this pine tree painting was something that he had left behind before his death, but it had long since disappeared without a trace. Who would have thought that he would be able to see the splendor of a famous master on this mid-autumn festival? The Sichuan emperor glanced at the painting and said, "Thank you for your thoughtfulness." Then, he ordered someone to put it away. In the eyes of the ministers, this scene made them think that something was amiss. They originally thought that the emperor, who loved paintings as much as his own life, would definitely praise the eldest prince greatly. However, they didn't expect the emperor to be so calm. Could it be that the emperor was so calm because of the commotion over the succession of the crown prince? However, the minister's suspicions were dispelled when the fourth prince, Xiao Ran, presented his gift. The second prince presented a rare luminous pearl from the southern sea, which received the Sichuan emperor's praise. The third prince Xiao Ho presented a 1,000-year-old Ganoderma lucidum, which was also praised by the Sichuan emperor. When the fourth prince presented him with a set of priceless writing brush, ink, paper, and ink stone, the Sichuan emperor's calm demeanor was immediately broken. He stroked his beard and said, "Good," 3 times. He even had someone bring it over and admired it for a while before having the palace servants put it away. Everyone was puzzled. Although this set of ink, paper, and ink stone was priceless, in terms of sincerity, it was not as good as the first prince's. In terms of value, it was not as valuable as the second prince's. In terms of value, it was not as valuable as the third prince's. Why was it able to receive such special treatment from the emperor? But on second thought, everyone already had the answer. Perhaps it wasn't the gift that caught the eye of Sichuan emperor, but the person who sent the gift. It was rumored that Sichuan emperor favored the fourth prince, and it was proven to be true. Everyone's gazes swept across the 4 princes, each with different thoughts. When Chu Qingyan saw all of this, she suddenly felt sorry for the tall and seemingly invincible person. When he returned to his seat, Xiao Su felt a small fist being stuffed into his hand. Then, like a small flower bud, it slowly bloomed. Petal by petal, it drilled through the gaps between his fingers and tightly wrapped around him. Xiao Su was surprised by her sudden clinginess. Thinking that she was not used to this kind of situation, he comforted her in a low voice, "If you don't like it, we'll go back in 2 hours." When Chu Qingyan heard this, she raised her head and smiled at him. "No, I just suddenly wanted to be close to you. Maybe it's because the night wind is a bit cold." "It's not that the night wind is too cold, but I'm afraid that your heart is too cold. My body temperature is not high, but I want to warm you up. Please don't mind." As if he could feel the warmth in her eyes, Xiao Su felt that the coldness in his heart was slowly being eroded and driven out by her. His gaze fell on the main seat. That family of 3 looked harmonious and warm. Then he looked at his Mufei, who sat there as if she was an outsider. His heart became ice cold. Since he was young, his imperial father had never looked at him. He had never given him any expectations, let alone encouragement. His imperial mother, who was strict to him, and his imperial father, who was indifferent to him, played the role of his parents in his life. On such a beautiful day, he couldn't feel any warmth in his heart. Until that pair of small hands held him without any hesitation. With a weak light, it slowly shone into the darkness in his heart. He originally thought that he would be lonely for the rest of his life, but suddenly, a little fellow appeared and held his hand, unwilling to let go. He felt that it was not bad to bring this burden along. "If we leave early, we might be able to make it in time for the banquet." His voice became a bit soft, but it was no longer as cold as before. Chu Qingyan thought that her parents were still in the palace and her face immediately lit up, when we go back, I must properly taste that fruit wine. Big ice cube can't stop me. His eyes reflected her carefree smile. Xiaosu unconsciously tightened his grip on her hand. Okay. Chu Qingyan was a bit surprised. Suddenly, she felt that the gentle big ice cube was really charming. Osmanthus blossoms all over my head. Which family's youth was so romantic? Very quickly, it was time to admire the chrysanthemums. The head steward of the imperial household department led the palace servants into the imperial garden in an orderly manner. Behind them were more than 100 palace maids, each of them holding a flower pot in their hands. Inside the flower pot were different kinds of chrysanthemums. The first to enter everyone's eyes was the black peony. It had a bright red color, the peony of the chrysanthemum. Then there was the jade plum. The leaves were long and thin, the color was snow white, and the center of the chrysanthemum was dyed a light yellow. Very quickly, the flowers were mesmerizing. There were graceful jade phoenixes, snowflake-like seas, shy women, beautiful celestial mushrooms, dancing swans, noble black chrysanthemums, white celestial peonies. There were too many to count because everyone had already become fans of these chrysanthemums. Chu Qingyan didn't even dare to blink, afraid that she would miss these precious chrysanthemums. She had seen some of them at the chrysanthemum exhibition before, but there were even more that she had never seen before. Xiaosu saw that she was dazzled, so he let her go out to admire. Because the chrysanthemums were all piled up in the center of the imperial garden for the palace servants to admire, many people left their seats and went closer to see these rare and precious flowers. Chu Qingyan also joined the army of fans. Xiao Ran, who was on the side, had been paying attention to Chu Qingyan. When he saw her leave, he also stood up and walked over. After not seeing her for a while, he found that she had already grown taller and was even more radiant. The feelings of longing that he had hidden began to flood out when he saw her from afar. Qingyan. Chu Qingyan heard someone calling her and turned her head to look. She saw Xiao Ran standing in the crowd. He was wearing a snow-white brocade robe decorated with fine sapphire blue patterns. He had sapphire blue sleeves and a sapphire blue belt. Blue and white, it made this person stand tall and handsome. Chu Qingyan shook her head. Sure enough, it was a beauty that could bring disaster to people. When Chu Qingyan turned her head, Xiao Ran's heart had already skipped a beat. Thinking of clothes in the clouds, face in the flowers. The spring breeze brushed the railings and the dew was thick. If not seen on top of the Jade Mountain, would be met under the moon in the Jade Pavilion. In the sea of flowers, she had a beautiful head and beautiful eyebrows. She smiled sweetly. She was wearing a white soft silver lily dress, which made her figure slender, gentle, and beautiful. Xiao Ran couldn't help but be stunned. Linghu Xiaomu and the others who had been paying attention to Xiao Ran almost tore the embroidered handkerchief in their hands when they saw this scene. Chapter 132. Fourth Prince, what's wrong? Chu Qingyan saw that he was in a daze and couldn't help asking. Xiao Ran came back to his senses and rubbed his head in embarrassment. Nothing, I just feel that after not seeing you for a long time, you seem to have grown a lot taller and more beautiful. Chu Qingyan smiled generously when she heard that. Of course I've grown taller. Recently, I've been undergoing devilish training, it would be strange if I didn't grow taller. What do you mean by more beautiful? But this lady's looks are not bad to begin with. Being teased by Chu Qingyan, he didn't talk back like before and instead laughed happily with her. Chu Qingyan felt that this Xiao Ran seemed to have changed into a different person after not seeing him for a few days, but she didn't pay much attention to it. Qingyan, I haven't been to the prince's residence in this period of time, did you think of me? Xiao Ran saw that she was unable to take her eyes off the chrysanthemums and mumbled the words that he had hidden in his heart for many days. But his voice was too soft, so Chu Qingyan turned her head and asked, what did you just say? He had already used up all his courage in seeing her turn her head. He quickly waved his hand. Nothing, nothing. Chu Qingyan frowned. Fourth prince, you're acting very strange today. Are you sick? Are you sick? Perhaps he was suffering from lovesickness. It was just that the person involved couldn't see his own heart clearly. No, it's just that imperial concubine mother is restricting me from leaving the palace, so it's a bit stuffy. Xiao Ran made up an excuse. Chu Qingyan thought about it and felt that it was true. At that time, Consort Yu had almost beaten her to a pulp because of Xiao Ran, so her way of educating her son must be very tyrannical. So looking at the 12 or 13-year-old Xiao Ran in front of her, she felt a sense of sympathy and couldn't help but comfort him. As the saying goes, a strict mother produces a tall son. Even though your imperial concubine mother is very strict with you, but it's for your own good, so just bear with it. Xiao Ran pursed his lips. A strict mother produces a tall son. Wasn't a strict teacher supposed to produce a brilliant disciple? Only she would be able to do such a thing. However, was she really comforting him and not gloating over his misfortune? What did it mean to endure it? However, he thought of something and said guiltily, Qingyan, were you angry at how my mother treated you before? Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes at the night sky. If you were wronged, framed, and punished for no reason, would you be happy? I'm sorry. I apologize on behalf of my mother. Please don't take it to heart. Xiao Ran quickly said. Chu Qingyan originally wanted to scold him a little more, but when she saw him speaking so humbly to her, she pursed her lips and finally swallowed the words in her throat and sighed. Forget it, as long as she doesn't target me or Lord in the future, I won't be angry. Xiao Ran immediately smiled. It was as if the moon had suddenly parted the dark clouds in the night sky to reveal the blue sky. It was so bright that it penetrated one's heart. Chu Qingyan sighed in her heart. Why was this child so straightforward? Didn't he know that Consort Yu and the Fu family behind her were at odds with Big Ice Block and the Liang family? She could imagine that in a few years, there would be no Liang family, and no Liang family. This was the cruelty of politics. However, now was not the time to point it out. Chu Qingyan closed her mouth and focused on admiring the chrysanthemums. After admiring the chrysanthemums, the palace banquet began. Faced with the exquisite dishes that were pleasant to the eye but not to the mouth, Chu Qingyan gave Big Ice Block a thumbs up. As expected, he had foresight. Otherwise, she would have gone home hungry tonight. Xiao Su glanced at her indifferently. Although he did not show it on his face, there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. Big Ice Block, where do you think we will be during the next Mid-Autumn Festival? Chu Qingyan held her chin. Although her eyes were looking at the singers, her mind had drifted away. Why do you ask? Xiao Su held the wine glass and swirled it, but he did not drink it. His gaze fell on the wine, and there was a distant look in his eyes. Because today you don't know what will happen tomorrow, and this year you don't know what will happen next year. No one can guarantee that if you are here today, you will still be here next time. No one can guarantee that after today, you will still be by your side tomorrow. There are many accidents in life, and no one can control them. The 15th of August, the Mid-Autumn Festival. Every time there was a festival, one would think of one's family. Under the bright moonlight, she thought of many things. 20 years of life, childhood sweethearts, desk mates, high school classmates who agreed to apply to the same university, and future college roommates who planned together. She had thought that her life would not have so many accidents, and everything would be going according to plan. But suddenly there was an accident. After sleeping for a while, she appeared in the ancient times. There was no advanced transportation, no familiar companions, and she could only rely on her own efforts to protect her family from being bullied. When she saw the moonlight, it was as if a hole had opened in her heart, and the cold wind rushed in. She did not know what day it was. That was why she felt emotional. Would the person who had been with her for a long time leave? Would everything disappear the moment he opened his eyes? Would it be like a dream? She did not dare to think too much about it. Xiao Su did not know why she would feel emotional like this. He only felt that this kind of emotion did not suit her bright personality. No matter what, this king will not leave you alone. Big ice block, it's a promise. She turned her head and looked at him seriously. Tonight, Chu Qingyan made him feel that something was wrong. She seemed to have matured a lot and grown up a lot. But when he looked at her carefully, he saw that she was smiling innocently. He narrowed his eyes. Could it be because of the feng shui in the palace? Let's go back to the palace. Xiao Su suddenly said. We're only halfway through. Is it all right for us to go back like this? Chu Qingyan was slightly surprised. It's fine. No one dares to question what this king does. Xiao Su stood up and said to the Sichuan emperor after leaving some instructions. Chu Qingyan subconsciously looked around. Su Jian had already disappeared. It seemed that leaving early was not a big deal. So the two of them left hand in hand. Although many people rolled their eyes at her, Chu Qingyan calmly accepted it. Once she became the consort of the King of England, she had to get used to these kinds of envious, jealous, and hateful gazes. It wasn't that no one had come to strike up a conversation tonight, but the big ice block's aura was too strong, so it was enough to make them shrink back. There were also some who didn't fear death and wanted to propose a toast, but the big ice block just sat there and ignored them. Otherwise, he would have her use tea in place of wine to return the favor, so that these girls would have the intention to retreat. Chu Qingyan clicked her tongue and commented. Her big ice block had the ability to sweep away black-hearted female supporting leads. Not bad, not bad. Not long after Chu Qingyan and Xiao Su left, a eunuch quietly walked to the side of a person on the platform and said in a low voice, His Royal Highness has already left. A magnificent voice rang out, do it. Yes. Those gentle eyes were now shining with a bloodthirsty light. Eldest brother, fourth imperial brother, this time, you won't be able to escape. Chu Qingyan and Xiao Su, who had left, did not know that a storm was about to come. Chapter 133. A eunuch walked to Xiao Ran's side and spoke in a voice that everyone could hear. Your Highness the fourth prince, the first prince is in the side chamber. He says he has something to discuss with you and asks that you and this servant go over. Xiao Ran was originally puzzled as to why his eldest brother and Qingyan had disappeared in the blink of an eye. He originally wanted to go look for them, but now that someone had come to report, it was like someone had sent him a pillow when he wanted to sleep. Thus, he asked for instructions from the Sichuan emperor and left with the eunuch. Xiao Ran thought that he would be able to see Chu Qingyan later and felt incomparably happy. He held the doll that he had prepared to give to Chu Qingyan and was a bit excited. He didn't have time to give it away just now. If Qingyan was by his eldest brother's side, he would give it to her. Thus, Xiao Ran was a bit absent-minded as all his thoughts were on the meeting later. After passing through the long corridor and the lotus pond, they arrived at a remote palace. Xiao Ran felt that something was wrong. If his eldest brother had something to discuss with him, he wouldn't have chosen such a remote place. Why would this eunuch bring him here? At this moment, the eunuch who had lowered the brim of his hat had his back facing Xiao Ran. It was unknown what he was thinking. Xiao Ran looked around the empty palace and felt suspicious. Why would my imperial brother choose this place? Did you come to the wrong place? Only to hear a horrifying laugh come from the lowered brim of the hat. The eunuch slowly turned around and put his hand on the hat and slowly took it off. Fourth prince, this is the right place. However, it's not Xiao Su who is looking for you. It's the king of hell who is coming to take your life. As soon as he finished speaking, the hat left his hand and quickly flew towards Xiao Ran. When the eunuch turned around, Xiao Ran was already paying attention. When he saw him make a move, he immediately dodged to the side to avoid the hat. However, it was clear that his movements were not fast enough. The eunuch took advantage of the time when Xiao Ran dodged to pull out the soft sword at his waist and flew towards Xiao Ran to stab him. Xiao Ran had to deal with 2 moves at once, and he was unable to cope. Therefore, the flexible sword pierced through his clothes at the waist, avoiding the most crucial vital point. The eunuch didn't get angry. With a backhand, he struck Xiao Ran's shoulder heavily. Xiao Ran spat out a mouthful of blood, and his whole body bounced back and hit the stone wall behind him. "Who are you? How dare you try to assassinate me?" Xiao Ran supported himself with both hands on the ground and stood up with difficulty. Although the corners of his mouth were bleeding, he still had the demeanor of a prince. At this time, he had not lost his pride. Xiao Ran knew that this person was a top-level assassin because he was clear about his own body. He wouldn't be so weak. Moreover, this person ignored his identity and attacked him. Then there were only 2 possibilities. The first was that this person was a hired assassin who was used to assassinate people. The second was that he was a death warrior who had been trained in the dark by a high official. He would wait for the right time to come out and eliminate a thorn in his master's side. "Fourth prince, you don't need to know who I am because you will soon go to hell." The eunuch raised his long sword and slowly approached. "What do you want?" "If you were paid by someone, then this prince will guarantee that he will give you 3 to 10 times the money." Xiao Ran ignored his movements and calmly negotiated with him. The assassin in eunuch uniform sneered, "Money has no allure to me. Fourth prince, you'd better close your eyes and enjoy the feeling of death." Raising his sword, he was about to stab the assassin's chest. Xiao Ran ruled out the first possibility. This person was not hired by someone, but was sent by someone to kill him. Xiao Ran looked at the tip of the sword and clenched his teeth. When it was about to fall, he used all his strength to roll to the side. His sword missed. The assassin suddenly became impatient. They had already been out for some time. If they didn't finish the mission soon, then those people would be suspicious. So he began to speed up. In a flash, he was in front of Xiao Ran and ruthlessly slashed at Xiao Ran. Because it was the Mid-Autumn Festival, every household hung up red lanterns, indicating that the following days would be red and full of unity. There were also people who put up lantern displays on the streets. There were all kinds of riddles written on them for people to guess. As long as they guessed right, they would give away the lantern. When Chu Qingyan's carriage passed by, Chu Qingyan was already attracted by the colorful and strange lanterns. "Big Ice Cube, I want to go look at the lanterns." This was the first time she was so close to the ancient folk, so Chu Qingyan was curious. Xiao Su was a casual person, but he had not met the right person yet. Now that he heard the little fellow's suggestion, he had someone stop the carriage. Chu Qingyan, who got off the carriage, turned around to urge Xiao Su, who was wearing a veil, before entering the crowd. When Hualing saw this, he immediately followed to protect the little princess from getting lost. When Xiao Su came to her side, she had already begun to guess the riddles. She didn't have any opinions, only guessing one word. Looking at the riddle on the paper, Chu Qingyan thought for a bit and then guessed it, the present. "Congratulations, miss, you guessed it right. This rabbit lantern is for you." The stall owner enthusiastically handed the lantern to her. Chu Qingyan took the rabbit lantern and hugged it. She said with a smile, "This is for my daddy, he likes rabbits a lot." The stall owner glanced at Xiao Su, who was standing beside Chu Qingyan. He really couldn't tell that such a cold person would like such a well-behaved animal like a rabbit. However, he still said in a flattering tone, "Looks like your daughter is very filial to you. Sir, you are really lucky." When the stall owner said this, Hualing turned his head and burst out in laughter. Turan was also in pain, holding back his laughter. "Big Ice Cube, you look very old." Chu Qingyan teased. Xiao Su suppressed his emotions and said to Chu Qingyan, who was puffing her cheeks and not daring to laugh, preparing to leave. Chu Qingyan immediately straightened and shook her head, saying, "Big Ice Cube, I haven't given you one yet." Wait a bit. After looking for a while, Chu Qingyan chose a carousel lantern and then had the stall owner give the riddle to her. This flower had never been planted before, but it would bloom in the middle of winter. It was strange that it had no roots or leaves, but when the spring wind blew, it returned to the sky. Chu Qingyan felt that this riddle wasn't hard and immediately gave the answer. The stall owner gave the carousel lantern to her and did not forget to praise Xiao Su. Your daughter is very smart. Xiao Su's face darkened as he pulled Chu Qingyan out. Turan and Huoling were a bit confused. Didn't Master want to raise the little princess Consort as his daughter? Why was he unhappy when someone said this? When they arrived in front of the carriage, Chu Qingyan was going to give the lantern in her hand to the big ice cube when a group of soldiers suddenly ran over and surrounded them. Chu Qingyan took back her hand and stood next to Xiao Su in a daze. The person in the lead was the first-rank armed guard, Lu Nuo. He walked out and cupped his hands towards Xiao Su. His Royal Highness, the fourth prince was attacked by an assassin just now and you are the most suspicious. His Majesty has ordered for you to come into the palace with this subordinate. Chapter 134. The fourth prince was assassinated. Chu Qingyan was stunned, but thinking about it, she could accept it. After all, on the street, those assassins were aiming for him. But what she could not understand was, what did this have to do with her big ice cube? This official, are you mistaken? His Highness was with us the entire time, how could he assassinate the fourth prince? Chu Qingyan stood in front of Xiao Su and coldly questioned him. This subordinate can't make the decision, this subordinate is only following orders. Let's ask His Royal Highness to explain this to His Majesty. Lu Nuo said in a methodical manner. Chu Qingyan felt that this was simply unreasonable. Just as she was about to argue with him, a force fell on her shoulder and she looked up at the big ice cube. It doesn't matter, this king will go with them to see how injured fourth brother is. Xiao Su's cold words were filled with comfort. Chu Qingyan felt that this matter was not that simple. She had a premonition in her heart that if he left this time, perhaps, no, I'll go with you. She firmly said. Be good, don't you still want to give the rabbit lantern to your father? They're still waiting for you in the palace. Xiao Su rarely saw her sticking to him like this. His lips curled into a smile, but it was hidden under the mask, so no one could see it. Chu Qingyan's heart was unwilling, but she knew that she couldn't help. If she went with the big ice cube and he had to take care of her, wouldn't he be distracted? In the end, she could only nod her head. Her obedient and sensible behavior warmed Xiao Su's heart. He said a few words to Turan and Huoling before turning to leave. Suddenly, his sleeve was gently pulled. He looked down and saw a pair of eyes shining like stars with a bit of reluctance. Big ice cube, don't come back too late. I'll wait for you to come home. Cracks once again appeared on the cold wall of his heart, and the words that were as warm as the spring breeze drilled into his heart bit by bit. Go home. His eyes softened and he raised his hand to stroke her head. His voice was like a zither, all right, don't worry. You have to keep your word. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. She clearly had a bad premonition in her heart, but she was powerless to stop it. She could only convince herself not to become his concern. Xiao Su didn't answer. He only rubbed her head even more gently before he turned around and left. Thank you for His Royal Highness' cooperation. This way, please. Lu Nuo reached out and bowed to Xiao Su. Before he left, he glanced in the direction of Chu Qingyan and was slightly surprised. His Royal Highness was cold and aloof. He never let people get close to him. Today, he saw him being so gentle to Chu Qingyan. It was hard to believe. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, he wouldn't have imagined that the cold His Royal Highness could have such a gentle side. It could be seen that this little Wang Fei had a significant place in his heart. Watching as the big ice cube was taken away, Chu Qingyan held the merry-go-round in her hand that she wanted to give him. Her heart was at a loss. Her right eye kept twitching. As the saying went, the twitching of the left eye was a blessing, the twitching of the right eye was a disaster. She didn't know if it would come true. Big ice cube, you have to be fine. Seeing the little Wang Fei staring blankly in the direction that his master left, Turin went forward to remind her, "Little Wang Fei, it's late. Master told this subordinate to take you back as soon as possible." "Turin, His Highness will come back, right?" Chu Qingyan turned her head and looked at him like she wanted an answer. Turin had never seen the little Wang Fei so panicked. He looked in the direction of the imperial palace. He didn't have any confidence. Everything had happened so suddenly that no one could react. "It will be fine. He is our Highness." Turin lowered his head and didn't dare to look into her eyes. The little Wang Fei's eyes were too clear. If he looked into her eyes, he wouldn't be able to hide. Chu Qingyan didn't notice that something was wrong with Turin. She nodded as if she had found a trace of comfort. When she prepared to get on the carriage, she found that Huoling had disappeared. "Where's Huoling?" "He was sent by Master to investigate this matter." Turin replied truthfully. Chu Qingyan nodded to show that she understood. The big ice cube was the eldest prince of a country and had many elite soldiers under his command. He would definitely be able to find the truth. She raised her head to say to Turin, "If you have something to do, you don't need to worry about me. His Highness' matter is more important." Turin smiled when he heard this. "This subordinate's most urgent task is to send you back to the Fu." Chu Qingyan wanted to return a smile, but she found that she couldn't smile. She got into the carriage and looked at the empty couch across from her. Her heart was empty. There had been 2 people when they left, but only she was left when they went back. They quickly returned to the Wang Fu. When the people in the Fu saw that she was the only one who came back, they all asked about Lord's whereabouts. Chu Qingyan didn't have the mind to deal with them. She gave orders to White Tiger and Hong Yi and then gave them full authority to deal with it. The main reason was to appease the people. Because she was young and didn't have enough prestige in the Fu, it had to be done by the older people in the Fu. Hong Yi and White Tiger had stayed in the Wang Fu for a long time. Their endurance and adaptability were very good. When they heard Chu Qingyan's orders, their expressions changed slightly and then they took over all the matters in the Wang Fu. Chu Qingyan was very satisfied. Although she had taken over some matters in the Wang Fu under the urging of the ice cube, she was in a mess now. The most important thing for her now was to wait for the ice cube's news. She also sent people to send her parents back to the Chu family and told them not to go out casually for the next few days. She also told them to ignore the Chu family's questions. When Chu Mu's mother left, she didn't say anything. She only patted her daughter's head because she knew that her daughter's heart was in a mess at this time. She didn't need to add to her daughter's troubles. Chu Mu's father seemed to smell something wrong and became even more obedient. He held the rabbit lantern and waved at his daughter and left. 1 incense stick's time, 2 incense sticks' time passed. The night became darker. The main courtyard was brightly lit. "Mistress, you should go and rest first. If Lord comes back, this servant will call for you." Xining looked at her mistress who was standing on the windowsill and her heart ached. "No, I want to wait for news from His Highness." Chu Qingyan's tone was very firm. Xining's eyes turned red, but she knew that her mistress wouldn't listen to her no matter how she tried to persuade her. She put her hands together and muttered, "The merciful and merciful Guanyin Bodhisattva, please protect my lord's safety. Otherwise, my mistress will be sad." At this time, Huoling came back. Chu Qingyan hurriedly stepped forward and asked, "How is the investigation going? Is His Highness all right?" Huoling's expression was a bit ugly. "Tonight, His Highness the 4th Prince was attacked by an assassin in the side hall and the assassin escaped. I heard that he received Master's invitation, so all the blame was pointed at Master. His Majesty was furious and summoned Master back to the palace for interrogation. Now that the palace gates are locked, no news can be leaked. This subordinate can't find out how master is doing right now. Chapter 135. Chu Qingyan took a few steps back when she heard this and bumped into the table behind her. As expected, her premonition was right. Big Ice Cube wouldn't be coming back tonight. Once the palace doors were locked, even a fly wouldn't be able to fly in. When Turan came in, he saw the young princess leaning against the table in a daze. He couldn't help glaring at Hualing. What are you saying this to the young princess for? Aren't you just making the young princess worry for no reason? Don't forget what master told us before he left to take good care of the young princess. Hualing was also worried at this time. Even Water Spirit couldn't find any clues, so it could be seen that this matter was very troublesome. However, Turan was also angry at him and he couldn't suppress the anger in his heart. Isn't it the same if you knew earlier or later? His Majesty has always favored the fourth prince and has always wanted to find fault with master to suppress master. Now it's like a piece of meat that has been sent up for slaughter. Turan knew that what Hualing said was what he was worried about, but seeing the young princess hear this, her face turned white. Turan's face immediately sunk. He grabbed Hualing's collar and wanted to drag him out. Be careful with your words, you forgot again. Hualing knew that he had said something wrong when he spoke. Seeing Turan become angry, he didn't make a sound and just let him grab him. What are you doing? You don't even know what the situation is and you're already fighting. If His Highness knows, you'll all be punished according to the family rules. Hualing and Turan were stunned. They turned to look at the figure standing against the light. It was like she was wrapped in a yellow flame and her entire person was burning with a light that couldn't be ignored. Her tone was strict and her expression was serious. Her normal innocent smile was replaced by a serious expression and her young face was filled with a kind of dignity that people didn't dare look at. Hualing and Turan stopped and were a bit stunned. Was this still the pure young princess they normally saw? It was rare that she was not joking around like she usually was. Instead, she was being serious for once, but she had scared them. Chu Qingyan coughed softly and pulled them back to reality. Then, she spoke slowly. Right now, we still don't know what's going on in the palace. Don't panic. Do we have anyone who's good at spying? Chu Qingyan had no time to be surprised by her sudden change. The most important thing now was to deal with the ice cube. Turan was the first to regain his senses. He nodded. Yes, Water Spirit has a group of pigeons under her command. They are best at gathering intelligence and spying on information. Hualing has already sent her a message. She should have already made her move. Chu Qingyan nodded. Although she did not know who this water spirit was, according to the 5 elements of metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, if there was wood, fire, and earth, then there would be metal and water. Good. Even if the palace is completely surrounded, we have to find a way to get information. For example, how is the fourth prince's injuries? Also, didn't the assassin escape? Find a way to capture him. Furthermore, this kind of thing is usually done under someone else's orders. If we can find out who the real culprit behind the fourth prince's assassination attempt is, that would be the best. Chu Qingyan said, not allowing for any explanation. Xiao Ran was a little prince raised in the palace. He didn't bully people normally, so the possibility of someone taking revenge on him was very low. There was only one explanation, which was that someone wanted to kill him to achieve a goal. Then there must be someone behind this. Turan and Hualing nodded. The young princess was right. The two of them were panicking and didn't think about this. Right now, we have to prepare for the best and worst. If His Highness is cleared of suspicion, that would be the best, but we also have to prepare for the worst. She didn't want to prepare for the worst. There will probably be a result tomorrow. Turan lowered his head and thought for a moment before saying, if someone wants to use the fourth prince's assassination to frame master, there are 2 possibilities. One is to kill with a borrowed knife, and the other is to kill for the sake of framing master. Only master has never made enemies with others, so this subordinate can't figure out who would want to frame master. Chu Qingyan gave a cold smile and her eyes were deep as she said, there are only two reasons. If it isn't for money, then it's for power. Turan and Hualing looked at each other and saw shock in each other's eyes. Was this still their young princess who didn't know anything about the world? She could even see such a deep thing. You guys should investigate two directions first. One is Consort Yu, and the second is the matter of the crown prince. Consort Yu is doted on in the harem, so it is impossible for no one to be jealous. Moreover, she is gentle in front of others, but vicious behind others. There must be many concubines that have been poisoned by her. If someone wants to take revenge, it is not impossible. From the first time she saw Consort Yu when she entered the palace, she knew that this person was not a kind person, but rather a poisonous beauty. Turan and Hualing hid the shock in their hearts and nodded in response. As for the matter of the crown prince, the position of crown prince involves imperial power. You can investigate if anyone is dissatisfied with His Highness and the fourth prince. Perhaps you can find some clues, especially the second prince and third prince's henchmen. She couldn't be blamed for thinking too much, but once power was involved, people's hearts were hard to calm. At the chrysanthemum banquet, it wasn't like she didn't hear people discussing the matter of the crown prince. There were even people who used toasts to indirectly ask for advice from Big Ice Cube. She heard that Sichuan Emperor intended to appoint an heir after the chrysanthemum banquet. So for this matter to happen at such a critical moment, people couldn't help but be suspicious. This subordinate understands. Hualing and Turan both responded. You can go do what you need to do. Immediately report to me if there is any news, especially if it's related to the palace. Chu Qingyan calmly said. Yes. The two left with this order. When they left, Hualing and Turan were suddenly startled awake. They actually listened to the little princess orders. It was even the pure little princess that they didn't put in their eyes before. Turan, I'm not dreaming, right? Since when did the leader of our fierce valiant cavalry have to listen to a woman's orders? Hualing felt this was a bit inconceivable. Turan looked at the gloomy sky and his eyes sparkled with an unknown light. Did you notice that the little princess words and aura just now were a bit like master's? Hualing carefully thought about it and felt that it really was a bit similar. Don't think too much and just do your job properly. The fierce valiant cavalry isn't trash, they can judge good and bad themselves. Didn't you agree with what the little princess said just now? We will only do what is right and beneficial. Moreover, heroes come from the youth since ancient times. Perhaps the little princess can really bring master back safely. Turan patted his shoulder. Master had always been their backbone and only their fierce valiant cavalry could display their greatest use. Now that master wasn't here, could the little princess' thin shoulders support the situation? Perhaps this young and tender backbone would bring them unexpected surprises. Xining's eyes were filled with admiration for her master's intelligence. Although she didn't understand a single word, when Hualing and Turan left, she saw her master's body sway slightly. She quickly rushed forward to support her. Master, what's wrong? Chu Qingyan stabilized herself by leaning on her and waved her hand. It's nothing, I'm just a bit flustered. She slowly spread her hands and they were covered in sweat. She had used all of her mind to stabilize Hualing and Turan, but she wasn't worried that they wouldn't listen to her. They weren't people who couldn't tell right from wrong, so they wouldn't reject her ideas just because she was young. At this time, lightning suddenly flashed and thunder rumbled. She looked out of the window and had the illusion that a storm was about to come. Chapter 136. When Xiaosu followed the imperial guards into the palace doors closed behind him. He didn't stop and slowly followed the palace servants to the imperial study. When he reached the door of the imperial study, the eunuch standing guard told him that His Majesty had gone to Mingchen Hall and hadn't returned yet. Ming Chen Hall was fourth brother Shao Ran's palace. He glanced at the heavily guarded surroundings and walked away. His Royal Highness, where are you going? The eunuch standing guard immediately blocked his path and asked anxiously. This prince wants to go to Ming Chen Hall to visit fourth brother. Do I need your permission? Xiao Su glanced at him coldly. The eunuch was so scared that he trembled. It was rumored that the King of England's eyes were so cold that one look could scare someone to death. Although the rumors were a bit exaggerated, it was still accurate. However, he was in charge of guarding the King of England. If he ran away, how would he explain himself? As if he saw through his thoughts, Xiao Su sneered, "What? In your eyes, this prince has already become an assassin? Don't forget this prince's identity. As long as there is no conclusion, this prince will not be stopped by you." The eunuch immediately retreated in fear. His Royal Highness was right. His Majesty had only summoned the King of England to the palace and hadn't convicted him. Therefore, he shouldn't easily offend the King of England. Otherwise, he wouldn't even know how he died. After no one blocked his path, Xiao Su strode towards Ming Chen Hall. On his way here, he saw how strict the palace was and guessed that this assassination was no small matter. However, compared to his own suspicions, he was more worried about fourth brother's injuries. That child who loved to provoke him in front of him had now grown up, but he still couldn't change his personality. When he found out that something had happened to him, his heart had been in his throat. However, he knew that with Imperial Father and Consort Yu by his side, they would be more useful than him. But when he got close to the inner palace, he couldn't help but worry. When they arrived at Ming Chen Hall, the windows of the brightly lit hall reflected the silhouettes of people walking back and forth. At the entrance of the hall, imperial physicians walked in and out in a hurry. Everyone held their breaths, afraid to disturb the atmosphere at this moment. Xiao Su stood outside the hall, waiting for the people inside to pass on the message. However, what he waited for was not a eunuch, but his imperial father, who was dressed in bright yellow. He asked in a deep voice, "Imperial Father, how is fourth imperial brother's injury? Is it serious?" Sichuan Emperor suppressed the anger in his chest. His chest heaved violently. "Don't you know whether it's serious or not? How dare you show up here?" Xiao Su frowned. "Imperial Father, how is fourth imperial brother's injury?" This wasn't the time to ask why his imperial father's attitude towards him was so bad. He was most concerned about fourth imperial brother's injury. Seeing his imperial father so depressed, his injury must be serious. "Stop pretending. Do you think we don't know your temperament?" Inside, he didn't know whether his beloved son was alive or dead. His heart was already in his throat. When he saw Xiao Su, his anger exploded. "Imperial Father, he only wanted to know about fourth imperial brother's injury." "Kneel." Sichuan Emperor ordered without any explanation. Xiao Su was slightly startled. He immediately lifted his clothes and knelt on the ground. The stone bricks of early autumn were slightly cold, but it wasn't as cold as the coldness in his heart. He watched as the figure in bright yellow flicked his sleeves and left. The corner of his mouth hooked up in self-mockery. In Ming Chen Hall, Sichuan Emperor's angry roar resounded. "If you can't get Ranner out of danger, we will bury you with him. What's the use of us raising you?" He suddenly remembered that when his imperial father hadn't stepped into his palace for 3 months and stayed in the Moon Hall to take care of fourth imperial brother after court. He wanted to get his imperial father's attention, so he took a cold bath in the cold winter and caught a cold. His imperial mother ordered someone to tell his imperial father, but his imperial father only told him to rest well. At that time, he didn't understand and thought that his performance wasn't good enough. After he recovered, he worked hard to study, learn to write, and practice martial arts. But when the fire started and his life was uncertain, his imperial father only stopped for a moment before he hurried back to the Moon Hall. This was because fourth imperial brother, who was 3 years old, had eaten something bad. The eunuchs, palace maids, An imperial bodyguard standing at the entrance of the palace looked at him strangely. The dignified war god of a country, the legitimate imperial son, was reprimanded to kneel. This was probably a rare scene in the history of Sichuan Kingdom. He suddenly remembered that this wasn't the first time he was punished to kneel. It was just that every time it was related to fourth imperial brother. His imperial mother said that the main culprit was fourth imperial brother, but he knew that wasn't the case. If his imperial father hadn't given all his fatherly love to fourth imperial brother, he wouldn't have missed him. A bolt of lightning cut through the sky, as if it had sensed the tense atmosphere in the imperial palace and struck everyone's hearts, causing them to tremble. Soon, a torrential downpour came without warning. The bean-sized rain fell on his face, shoulders, and hands. It should have hurt, but he didn't feel anything. When he was fighting outside, he often had to march in the cold winter, the scorching sun, or the torrential rain. He was already used to it. A pair of exquisite shoes appeared in front of him. He raised his head and saw his imperial mother's angry face in the hazy rain. Imperial mother, the rain is heavy. Don't stand here. Your son is kneeling here. Do you think Imperial Mother can rest in the palace with peace of mind? Empress Liang said angrily. Imperial Mother, I is unfilial. I've made you worry. Xiao Su's gaze lowered slightly. The rain flowed down his cheeks and fell to the ground, creating ripples. If you really don't make this consort worry, then go explain to your imperial father and clear yourself of suspicion. Empress Liang angrily said. Luo Yun, who was holding an umbrella, quickly patted Empress Liang's back to help her breathe. Imperial Mother, don't be angry. Xiao Su pursed his lips and said, Imperial Father is currently angry. It's useless for I to say anything. Let's wait until fourth Imperial Brother's condition stabilizes. Xiao Su, are you only willing to do this if Imperial Mother is angered to death? With your abilities, can't you find out who the culprit is? Imperial Mother doesn't believe you. Empress Liang said through gritted teeth. I still don't know what's going on, so it's even more impossible for me to know who the culprit is. Xiao Su's eyes flashed slightly, but he still lowered his head in the end. Good, good, good. Empress Liang said good 3 times in a row before leaving with a flick of her sleeves. Xiao Su watched his imperial mother's departing figure with a bitter feeling in his heart. There was a suspect in his heart, but he couldn't, he wanted to, but he couldn't. In front of imperial father, who was determined to believe that he was the culprit, no matter how much he said, it would be the same as covering it up. He raised his head. The 3 words Ming Chen Hall, under the faint illumination of the moonlight, sparkled with specks of light. Ming Chen, these 2 words were given to fourth imperial brother by imperial father. It represented the brightest star. Perhaps in imperial father's heart, fourth imperial brother was the brightest star in his heart. The 15th moon was very round. When it shone on the ground, the moonlight soaked into the water, but it made people feel cold. Chapter 137. In the heavy rain, the world seemed to be covered by clouds of fog, and the scenery in the distance could not be seen clearly. In the dark night, the capital city was shrouded in darkness. On the night of the full moon in the Mid-Autumn Festival, His Majesty's beloved prince was assassinated, and His Royal Highness was summoned to the imperial palace overnight. The ministers and aristocratic families who attended the palace banquet were all in a state of panic. One was the legitimate prince with many achievements, and the other was the beloved prince who was favored by the emperor. No matter which one of them had an accident, it would cause chaos in the Sichuan dynasty. This night was destined to not be peaceful. No one could sleep peacefully. No one dared to sing to their heart's content. No one was in the mood to celebrate. Because it was possible that the imperial city would be turned upside down overnight. Everyone's gaze turned towards the heavily guarded imperial palace. Everyone's attention was on the tightly shut palace doors. Because they knew that once the palace door was opened, good or bad news would come out, and it would indicate the trend. The matter of the crown prince had been discussed in full swing these 2 days, but it was very likely to be extinguished. This night was destined to be a sleepless night. Xining changed several teacups, but her master clasped her hands on the table, and her eyes were listless. She had no intention to rest or drink tea. Her master had maintained this posture for more than 2 hours. No matter how she persuaded her master, she was unwilling to rest. She could only give up and stand quietly by her master's side, waiting for her master. "The door is not locked, right?" Chu Qingyan suddenly asked. Xining hurriedly replied, "No, steward Bai obeyed master's order and sent someone to guard the door. If someone calls the door, it will be opened immediately. They won't miss the return of Lord." Chu Qingyan was a little relieved and said, "Remember to keep the ginger soup in the kitchen warm. If His Highness comes back, he can drink it while it's hot. The rain is so heavy, he should be careful not to catch a cold." Xining was a little sad when she heard this, and tears almost fell, but she immediately replied, "Sister Huang Yi will take care of it. She said that she will keep the ginger soup warm until Lord comes back." Since she came back, her master had been talking about these things. She was a little distressed for her master. She really hoped that Lord would come back soon, so that her master could stop worrying. Although she knew that once the palace door was locked, it would be difficult to open it again, and although she had asked Turin and Huling to make preparations, the big ice cube promised her that he would come back, so she would wait for him with the most optimistic heart. She turned to look at the storm that was getting bigger and bigger. The raindrops that were madly hitting the window made pitter-patter sounds. Her heart followed suit. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain, as if someone was stabbing her heart with a needle. She couldn't help but clutch her chest and frown. It seemed that the bad feeling was getting stronger and stronger. "Little Princess Consort." Huoling's voice suddenly pierced through the rain and entered her ears. Chu Qingyan immediately stood up as her gaze landed on the door. Coincidentally, the fire spirit was rushing in. "Why are you in such a panic?" Huling, who was always smiling, had an urgent look on his face, making her feel a strong sense of unease. News came from the imperial palace. Master was punished by His Majesty to kneel. Huling suppressed his anger as he spoke through gritted teeth. "What?" Chu Qingyan couldn't help taking a step back. She looked at Huling in disbelief. "Is this news accurate?" Huling nodded with difficulty. "This news came from Chaoyang Palace, there is no mistake." "Where did he kneel?" Her voice was very low. "Mingchen Hall, in front of the palace where the 4th prince lives." Huling clenched his fist as he angrily said. Chu Qingyan heard this and turned to look at the crazy rain outside. Her eyes became hot. Such a big rain and such a cold wind, she did not know if the big ice cube could handle it. "Why?" Her voice trembled a little. Huling said through gritted teeth, "The 4th prince was attacked by an assassin and His Majesty took his anger out on Master. He punished him to kneel without any explanation. Moreover, this is not the first time." "It's not the first time." Her voice was filled with shock. "That's right. Many years ago, when the 4th prince was just born, Master was also very young and accidentally made the 4th prince cry. His Majesty made him kneel as punishment. This time, it was the first time Master wore a mask. The 4th prince came to the palace for a visit. When he saw the mask on Master's face, he cried in fright. His Majesty was furious and also made Master kneel as punishment. Also." Speaking to there, Huling couldn't continue. He only let out a cold sigh. He did not want to tell the little princess, but thinking about it, since Master cared about her so much, she should understand Master more and care more about Master because Master had been alone for too long. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips as anger filled her eyes. Her heart was filled with pain. When the 4th prince was just born, the big ice cube was still a child. When he put on the mask, the big ice cube had just escaped from a sea of fire. His body and mind were both damaged, yet the Sichuan emperor really could do it. The Sichuan emperor really went too far. He was not worthy of being a father. These things were clearly not intentional, but in his eyes, the fourth prince was his treasure. No matter who it was that touched him, he would not forgive them. Actually, the Sichuan emperor's heart was crooked. The big ice cube had not been this cold since he was young. It should have been because he was hurt again and again when he was young that the cold accumulated and turned into this cold person. The so-called 3 feet of ice was not formed in a single day, this should be it. But she did not want to think that much. She just wanted the big ice cube to come back soon. On such a cold night, with such cold rain, with him kneeling in the palace without any human feelings, her heart ached when she thought of that scene. That tall god of war who seemed like nothing could defeat him. His Royal Highness who was always cold, but had a softer heart than others. That big ice cube who was always fierce to her, but would always soften his tone when she acted coquettishly. She could not bear to leave him alone in such a cold world. She regretted it. If she had insisted on going with him at that time, he would not have to face the loneliness of the reunion night alone. If she had insisted a little more and acted coquettishly, perhaps his heart would have softened. But the heavens did not let people regret, and there were no ifs. The night slowly passed. The rain slowly became lighter. The sky slowly brightened. Chu Qingyan, who was sitting on the bed, looked up at the dispersing dark clouds. The morning sun slowly shone through the haze. The day had begun again. Usually, she welcomed the beginning of a new day with a good mood. But at this moment, she hoped that the sky would brighten a little later and that the new day would come later. When the sky was just turning white, Turan walked in with a serious expression. Just now, news came from the palace. Master has been locked up in the prison. The cup in his hand slipped and fell to the ground with a crisp sound. Chu Qingyan looked at the wet ground, the scattered tea leaves, and the broken pieces that Xining had rushed over to clean up. She was stunned. Chapter 138. Seeing the dazed little princess, Hualing and Xining looked at her with worry. Chu Qingyan was stunned for a moment before she forced herself to pull herself together. She looked at Hualing, her eyes glistening with tears. Last night, I knelt in the palace for an entire night. This morning, I was locked up in the prison. I don't know if His Highness' body can take it. Can you think of a way to find out news about His Highness? Water Spirit is already thinking of a way to send a message to Master. Little princess, don't worry. Hualing immediately replied. Actually, no one was relieved. Everyone knew that everything had happened too suddenly and it was too dangerous. How are fourth prince's injuries? Chu Qingyan thought of Xiao Ran and couldn't help asking. Fourth prince's injuries are serious. It's said that he was stabbed in the chest by a sword, but fortunately his vitals weren't hit. He was only out of danger this morning, but he is still unconscious. Hualing reported the latest news. Chu Qingyan nodded. It was good that Xiao Ran was fine. Otherwise, the big ice cube wouldn't have just been imprisoned. With how much Dong Lin Emperor doted on Xiao Ran, the big ice cube's life would have been in danger. She felt a bit sorry for Xiao Ran. He treated her as a friend, but she was worried about the big ice cube's safety. Forget it, when the big ice cube was fine, she would make it up to him. The most important thing now was to save the big ice cube. How is this kind of case usually handled? She was directly imprisoned by the emperor. She was worried that if she was convicted, there wouldn't be any room to turn things around. The Supreme Court will investigate the case and then choose a day for the trial. With Master's status, it should be a joint trial. His Majesty might be there personally. Hualing grabbed the chair with one hand and the anger in his heart was hard to dispel. Chu Qingyan nodded, then how many days do we have to investigate the case? Hualing shook his head with a bitter smile, those ministers have always steered according to the wind. Now that His Majesty is furious, it is clear that he has determined that Master is the mastermind behind this. How could those ministers still bother to investigate this case? Chu Qingyan was startled. Once you're proud, you'll be praised by tens of thousands. Once you're down, you'll be trampled on by tens of thousands. No, we can't just sit here and wait for death. Turan, gather all of you and see if there's any way to save His Highness. Also, doesn't His Highness have some hangers-on under him? See if you can brainstorm. Chu Qingyan's tone was a little anxious. When Hualing heard this, he felt that this was the most feasible method. He agreed and turned to leave, but then he stopped and looked up at the young Wang Fei. Turan is doing his best to find the real culprit behind the scenes, and Water Spirit is also trying to find news about Master, so please don't worry. You must take care of your body. Chu Qingyan smiled at him, indicating that she understood. However, knowing was one thing, doing it was another. Xining looked at her master's lifeless eyes and her heart was filled with pity. The fire spirit met Turan and Ethereal after leaving the door. How is the investigation of the real culprit behind the scenes? Hualing immediately asked. Turan shook his head. This assassin is very cunning. After he was discovered when he tried to assassinate the fourth prince, he was chased by the Imperial Guards. He was very familiar with the layout of the Imperial Palace, so the Imperial Guards lost him. His current whereabouts are unknown, but one thing is certain, this person is still in the capital. After the incident, the 4 gates of the capital were sealed. Anyone who entered or left had to go through strict checks, so that assassin should be hiding somewhere in the capital right now. Ethereal, who had been silent on the side, spoke up. I secretly asked a few Imperial physicians that I'm close with. They said that the fourth prince's wounds were neat and clean. It's clear that the assassin is not a normal assassin, but someone who has undergone strict training. He might even be a hidden guard. Hualing forcefully hit the wall beside him when he heard this, but it was hard for him to vent the anger in his heart. This really was a carefully planned trap. They used Master's name to lure out the fourth prince, and Master just happened to not be here at the time. It really makes people unable to explain themselves. Turan shook his head in ridicule. You're wrong. There is evidence that Master was not present, but His Majesty does not believe it. Moreover, there is no need for him to do something like an assassination himself. Moreover, it is currently an eventful period for the Crown Prince. His Majesty is certain that Master is unwilling to take the risk to get rid of his opponent, so when the time comes, no matter how much evidence there is, His Majesty will not believe it. But we can't just watch as Master is wronged and can't do anything. Hualing hated himself for being incompetent. Ethereal had the same self-blame on his face. When we first returned to the capital, we all thought that we wouldn't stay in the capital for too long, so when Lord didn't deploy his spies, I didn't remind him. Looking at it now, I should have advised Master to leave a way out for himself. If our people had infiltrated everywhere, we wouldn't be as helpless as we are now. Turan patted his shoulder. You can't be blamed for all of this. Who would have guessed that His Majesty would take away all of Master's military power? At this point, Turan suddenly raised his head and looked at the young Wang Fei standing in front of the windowsill. His eyes were so deep that no light could be seen. Young Wang Fei, this is the current situation. If you are afraid, this subordinate can send you away. Turan's tone was calm and somewhat cold. What do you mean? When Turan and Ethereal appeared in front of her windowsill, she faintly felt that they were talking to her. Nothing, but Master once said that if something happens to him, if you want to leave, this subordinate can protect you until you leave. Turan looked at her and said word by word, as if he wanted to see something from her face. When did he say that? Chu Qingyan put her hands on the windowsill and suppressed her emotions. When the young Wang Fei was poisoned. This time, if His Majesty insisted that it was Master's doing, then the young Wang Fei couldn't escape being implicated. Everyone's eyes fell on Chu Qingyan. Her lowered eyelids faintly trembled, but she suddenly calmed down. It's not the last moment yet. Why are you saying such discouraging words? She slowly raised her head. Her eyes were filled with a determined light that people didn't dare to look directly at. If His Highness knows that you are panicking, he won't forgive you when he comes out. Cheer up and get to work. Chu Qingyan said coldly. This was the first time she spoke so harshly to Turan and the others. She seemed to have returned to her university days. The stage was still being built when it suddenly started to rain. Everyone told her to cancel it. But the invitations from all the universities had been sent out. The leaders of the universities would arrive in an hour. The rain blurred her eyes, but she stood on the stage and didn't admit defeat. She shouted to the workers below, "It's not the last moment yet. Don't give up. Set up the canopy. Hurry. Get the poles ready. Get to work." She couldn't give up. That was everyone's hard work for a year. She couldn't give up because it wasn't a joint performance. It was a living person that she liked. Turan, Fire Spirit, and Ethereal looked at the tightly shut window. They suddenly felt that they didn't know her anymore. The confident, wise, and bold woman seemed to have transformed overnight. Turan, I suddenly feel that maybe I know why she can win Lord's heart, Ethereal said lightly. No, in fact, none of us understood it. The first person to understand it was His Highness. The Earth Spirit patted their shoulders. Then they left together. The little princess was right. They couldn't give up so easily. Their master was still waiting for them to rescue him. Hearing their footsteps leave, Chu Qingyan leaned against the window and slowly slid down. In the end, she sat on the ground and hugged her knees, crying helplessly. Big Ice Cube, you knew this day would come, didn't you? So you prepared a backup plan for me in advance, right? How can you make my heart ache so much? How can I save you? Big Ice Cube. Chapter 139. The fourth prince was assassinated and the eldest prince was imprisoned. Overnight, the people of the imperial court were in a state of panic. In the morning court, the fourth prince's faction, led by the right Prime Minister Fu Jianrong, was devastated. They scolded the King of England for being cruel and inhumane. He even killed his own brother. The ministers who stood on the King of England's side retorted that this was a blatant framing. They could not accuse him without evidence. When a war of words was about to break out, the Sichuan Emperor ordered the Supreme Court Chancellor to thoroughly investigate the matter. The left Prime Minister Liang Qingyu, Empress Liang's father and Xiao Su's grandfather, pleaded on behalf of Xiao Su. The Sichuan Emperor was furious and rejected his pleas. The ministers who supported Xiao Su all kept their mouths shut and did not dare to say a word. After the morning court, the fourth prince's faction snorted at the King of England's faction and then left. Prime Minister Liang's face was full of anger. A minister beside him asked in a low voice, "Left Prime Minister, what should we do now?" Prime Minister Liang said with a sullen face, "His Majesty has been looking for an opportunity to suppress His Royal Highness, but he could not find an opportunity. This time, His Highness wanted to return to the border, but His Majesty did not want to let the tiger return to the mountain and cause trouble in the future, so he insisted on keeping His Highness here. Now that this has happened, even if His Majesty knows that he is not the mastermind behind this, he will still turn a blind eye to it." His Highness, the minister did not say anything clearly. That minister had not been in the bureaucracy for a day or two, so he nodded in shock. Looking at His Majesty's attitude, His Royal Highness would not be able to escape censure. "But we can't let His Royal Highness take the blame for this," the minister whispered. Prime Minister Liang nodded, "I will go find the Empress and see what she has to say." "Left Prime Minister, please go. I will wait for your news." "No matter what happens, I will advance and retreat with Your Highness," the minister said solemnly. Liang Xiang took a deep look at him. This was the deputy general who had followed him for decades. He had been a small soldier back then, but he had overcome all obstacles and killed 6 generals all the way to the brave general he was now. Now, he was already over 50 years old. His hair was white and his body was straight, but it was hard to hide his heroic appearance. Liang Xiang patted his shoulder and said, "Okay." There was no need for words to be said. The agreement between gentlemen had already been fulfilled. In Chaoyang Palace, Empress Liang was leaning against the couch, looking exhausted. When she heard that her father wanted to see her, she immediately ordered someone to bring him in. This old subject greets the Empress. Prime Minister Liang bowed. Empress Liang hurriedly ordered someone to help him up. Her father was about to enter the threshold of 60 years old. Although his body was strong, it was difficult to hide the fact that he was aging day by day. Her son was imprisoned in the prison and she felt very uncomfortable. Seeing her father in front of her, she couldn't help but feel wronged. "Father," after Empress Liang called out, she was a little choked with emotions. Prime Minister Liang sighed. "Yuan, father came to the palace this time because of Su, When Empress Liang heard this, she waved her attendants away. There were only 2 people in the large hall. "Father, do you have a way to save Su, Empress Liang's eyes were filled with hope. Prime Minister Liang looked at his daughter in front of him. Since she was young, this daughter had not grown up in front of him. She had stayed in the boudoir and had seen many open and covert struggles in the inner court. She had learned a lot, but she had always lacked the ability to see the big picture. Moreover, she was not broad-minded enough. That was why she had been suppressed by Consort these past few years. Even His Majesty was unwilling to approach her Chaoyang Palace. However, now was not the time to think about these things. Su, was the most important thing. After the 4th prince was attacked by an assassin, did you visit him? Did you comfort Consort Yu? Prime Minister Liang asked. Empress Liang's eyes immediately widened. That slut's child was injured. Why should this consort visit him? This consort couldn't even be happier, let alone comfort that slut. When Prime Minister Liang heard this, he shook his head. No one knew his daughter better than her father. He had already expected this, so he raised his hand to stop her from throwing a tantrum. Nonsense. Do you still think that you're the legitimate daughter of the Fu family who can do as she pleases? You must recognize your current status. You are the empress of a country. Your speech and actions must have the demeanor of an empress. Don't blame His Majesty for favoring Imperial Concubine Yu. Look at Imperial Concubine Yu's appearance, then look at yourself. Empress Liang refused to accept being scolded. Consort Yu's methods are vicious and vicious. Father, how can you praise her and belittle your own daughter? Prime Minister Liang rubbed his forehead. But she knows when to be soft and when to be ruthless. That's why in His Majesty's eyes, she's gentle and pleasant, while you're selfish and narrow-minded. This is the difference. Yuan, you've lived in this cannibalistic palace for 20 years. How can you still be like a child? Don't blame His Majesty for not liking Su, In fact, most of the reason is because of you. Empress Liang wanted to refute, but she couldn't say anything. Prime Minister Liang continued, when the incident happened last night, you should have immediately sent imperial physicians to treat the 4th prince. Comforting Consort Yu is the same as comforting the harem. You shouldn't have been so stingy as to send precious medicinal ingredients to Mingchen Hall. Only this could show your magnanimity and steadiness as the head of the harem. But look at what you've done. If someone were to make a fuss about this, they would think that you were too guilty to show up because your son did something wrong. If you had taken care of everything, His Majesty wouldn't have disrespected you as the head of the harem and mercilessly punished Su, Yuan, if you don't quickly wake up, I'm afraid that our Liang family will decline, or die without a burial place. Empress Liang was so scared that she trembled. She immediately grabbed her father's hand and asked in panic, "Then what should daughter do now?" "Do as father said just now. Reward and comfort. Don't miss a single glance." "Okay. What else?" Empress Liang finally understood the seriousness of the matter. If it weren't for her father's advice, Su-er would have been ruined by her. Also, Prime Minister Liang sighed softly, "Go and beg His Majesty. For the sake of our many years of relationship as husband and wife, let Su-er off the hook. At the very least, there should be a fair investigation process." Empress Liang nodded. This was the only thing she could do. When Prime Minister Liang was about to leave, Empress Liang suddenly called out to him. "Father, if His Majesty isn't willing to let go of this opportunity to suppress Su-er, then her tone was somewhat gloomy. Then, Prime Minister Liang didn't turn back, "We'll prepare for the worst. There's no turning back." Empress Liang's eyes darkened even more. "Okay. If that was the case, then they could only cut off all means of retreat." On the 9th floor of the Celestial Prison, Xiao Su sat on the floor in plain clothes. His expression was cold and cheerless, and he didn't become impatient because he was locked up in the Celestial Prison. He raised his head to look at the moon outside the window and remembered what the little fellow had said to him before. The moon on the 15th was full on the 16th. He had never paid attention to the full moon before. He only noticed it because of the little fellow. Tonight's moon was indeed very round. He remembered that he had promised her that he would accompany her to admire the moon tonight. Unfortunately, he could only go back on his word. He didn't know if the little fellow was frightened by his matter. Xiao Su's gaze became as cold and cheerless as the moonlight. The taste of longing, like the cool breeze and the bright moon, was indescribable. Chapter 140. Another day passed by. After hearing about the Sichuan Emperor's decree from Hualing and the others, Chu Qingyan began to miss Xiao Su even more. She was locked up for no reason and had to wait for trial. How long would it take for her to see the big ice cube? In the study, Hualing, Turin, and the others had already gathered all the retainers and were discussing a solution. Suddenly, she stood up. Everyone looked at her and Hualing asked, "Little Princess Consort, what are you doing?" Chu Qingyan looked at them, "I want to go to the prison to see His Highness." Turin frowned, "But if you go to see His Highness now, the guards probably won't let you in." Hualing nodded in agreement. Actually, everyone was worried. Her status was low, so the people in the prison might not think highly of her and let her in. Chu Qingyan saw through their thoughts and smiled slyly, "But don't forget, my status is the King of England's consort personally bestowed by His Majesty. This is an undeniable fact. We haven't come up with a solution after discussing it for a day. Why don't we go and listen to His Highness' idea? Maybe he has a way to save himself. Don't just stand there. Do you have any of our own people in the prison? Let's contact them so that it'll be easier to do things later." She was the princess consort of the royal family. Even if someone wanted to stop her, they had to consider their own status. Turin, Ethereal, and the others felt that this might work and nodded in agreement. Turin thought carefully and replied, "The guards in the prison are from the Fu family. I'm afraid it'll be difficult to get in. But the prison guard in charge of the prison has received master's favor before. Let's see if he can help." Chu Qingyan raised her eyebrows. "Okay, I'll ask Cheng Yi and Huang Yi to prepare clothes and food." Cheng Yi and Huang Yi immediately went to prepare when they heard that they were going to visit Lord in prison. An hour later, Chu Qingyan, Xining, and the others had boarded the carriage and were escorted by Hualing and the others to the prison. In the King of England's residence, Cheng Yi handed a slip of paper to a servant and said softly, "Chu Qingyan is going to the prison to visit Lord. Pass this news to Consort you." "Yes." Cheng Yi watched as the young servant disappeared through the back door and viciously smiled. She was someone that Imperial concubine Moon had placed at the prince's side since he was a child. She had always been there to pass on news from the prince's palace and help imperial concubine Moon complete some matters. But as Lord gradually shone with his manly charm, she became infatuated with Lord. She hoped that one day she could sit in the position of the head of the harem. But in the past few years, Lord turned a blind eye to her various hints. She knew that Lord didn't care about these romantic feelings, so she planned to take it slow. But who knew that Chu Qingyan would suddenly appear? She originally wanted to see Chu Qingyan make a fool of herself, but she didn't expect that Chu Qingyan would become Lord's reverse scale. No one could touch her. In the past, she had hoped that Lord would treat her differently, but now she didn't have the chance. Then don't blame her for being ruthless. Thinking of this, Cheng Yi flicked her sleeves and left. Chu Qingyan, who was driving on the road, didn't know that their hearts had been exposed. They arrived at the prison. Chu Qingyan alighted from the carriage and saw the prison made of green stone bricks. It gave off a sinister and cold feeling. The heavenly prison basically locked up people who were extremely vicious or had committed heinous crimes. So, the prison was more strict than other places. In front of the iron gate, there were more than 10 elite guards. When they saw Chu Qingyan and the others, they immediately shouted coldly. "Who are you? Report your name." "This is my family's King of England's consort. She wants to enter the prison to visit my family's lord." "Sir, please make things convenient." Huling approached and secretly stuffed the banknotes in his hand into the officer's hand. He said in a low voice, "This small token is not enough to show my respect. Sir, please drink some wine. The prison is an important place. How can you casually approach it?" A cold voice sounded. At this time, the iron gate opened in response. The officer immediately pushed Huiling's hand away and bowed to the person behind the iron gate. "Greetings to Sir." Chu Qingyan narrowed her eyes at the man with a protruding belly and an oily face in front of her. The Fu family's disciple, the current prison guard, Lu Chu. According to Huiling's information, Lu Chu was not present today. Why did he suddenly appear? "So it's Sir Lu. This princess consort wants to visit my family's lord. Sir, please make an exception," Chu Qingyan said with a smile. She did not want to hit a smiling person. Lu Chu had just received Consort Yu's secret letter and immediately rushed over. He was still a bit out of breath. When he looked at the young girl in front of him, he became impatient. Now that the King of England is an important suspect, no one is allowed to visit him. "Consort King of England, please go back." Lu Chu waved his hand and was about to order someone to close the iron gate when he was stopped by someone. "Sir Lu, although my family's lord is a suspect, who said that no one is allowed to visit him? His Majesty did not issue a decree, right?" Moreover, Chu Qingyan looked at him deeply. "My family's lord has not been convicted. He still has the right to be visited in prison." Lu Chu was speechless. Indeed, the King of England was only detained. There was no explicit decree that prohibited him from contacting the outside world. But, Imperial concubine Moon had said that since the fourth prince had been attacked by an assassin, no one was allowed to see him, regardless of whether or not it was related to Prince Ing. Perhaps this was a great opportunity to overthrow Prince Ing. As Lu Chu thought of the benefits that Imperial concubine Moon had promised him, he immediately straightened his back and shook his belly as he spoke with a righteous tone. "Please forgive this official for not being able to agree to your request." Chu Qingyan coldly laughed. "Lu Chu, there was a path to heaven but you refused to take it. There was no door to hell but you chose to throw yourself into it." Chu Qingyan slowly walked towards Lu Chu with a somewhat creepy smile on her face. When Lu Chu saw her sinister smile, his heart suddenly trembled. "Stop. The imperial prison is an important place. No one is allowed to approach. Official Lu, can we talk in private?" Chu Qingyan had a good temper as she stopped. "This official has nothing to say to you. Lu Chu raised his chin and said. Chu Qingyan held her head and seemed to have a headache as she said, so it's like this. Then what happened on the 6th day of the 5th month? What about the 7th day of the 6th month, the 19th day of the 6th month, and the 23rd day of the 7th month? I don't know if everyone here is curious about the story of stealing the sky and swapping the sun. Curious. Little Wang Fei, don't leave people hanging. Tell us, tell us. Hua Ling and the others understood and cooperated with her. Then before Chu Qingyan could finish, someone interrupted her. Wait. When Chu Qingyan said the first date, his forehead was already covered in sweat. He had comforted himself that perhaps she was just making things up. However, the more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. If he allowed her to continue, the consequences would be unimaginable. Does official Lu have something to say? Chu Qingyan pretended to be surprised as she looked at him. This official remembers now. His Royal Highness does have the right to visit. Please come in. Lu Chu wiped his sweat. Official Lu is truly understanding. This princess is very grateful. Chu Qingyan said with a smile. Then what about the things you just said? Lu Chu asked in a roundabout manner. In those days, the most vicious people were killed. This princess was happy for the citizens. Chu Qingyan said in an innocent voice. The King of England's consort is right, you're right. Lu Chu wiped his sweat again. Chu Qingyan gave a cold laugh in her heart. How could she not be prepared for anything? She had already had Hua Ling investigate Lu Chu's background and had firmly grasped his weakness. Know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. You're tuning into the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.